all different ages in our group. The second thing is that she was an incredible Black woman who I developed a very loving and close relationship with because of the number of struggles we had that summer over race. Because that was one of the most integrated neighborhoods in the city of Detroit, and the Black workers at the plant were disproportionately impacted by not being able to be replaced. And the tensions on the doors that we felt surfaced inside this multiracial team that I worked with. And I saw a model of somebody that could build a multiracial set of connections like nobody I've ever worked with since. And she was incredibly good at speaking to me as a white person and getting me to own my goodness, but also my blind spots, which was quite a feat, I thought. And then the third thing was that she taught me the difference between charity and justice. And I realized that this Friends Service Committee was into a justice approach to community organizing as opposed to a service based approach, and she was fierce about it. And she took a lot of guff. Is that guff? Is that a good live stream word? A lot of guff for standing up to the national office in Philadelphia about what we were going to try to do differently in Detroit. And I just have to tell you, I worked with this woman for 4 months. I had a 35-year relationship with her. She just recently passed, and she's had the most profound impact on how I lead and build relationships with anybody in my life.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm James Bonica. I'm the chairman of the Community Global Institute. This is a hard question for me, really, in the sense that I think I'm the product of lots and lots of people, actually, with helping my career. And there's a lot of them, some of them actually even in this room, and they know themselves. But I also wanted to point out in particular one group of people who've actually had an even bigger impact on my career, and it's a group, in the sense that these are the people who, when I was growing, so I grew up in a segregated environment where I grew up and things were very difficult in the town, but these are the people who told me I couldn't do the thing that I wanted to do. And in many respects, they actually would have had probably the biggest impact on my career because I wanted to prove them wrong. So, I grew up wanting to be a scientist, I wanted to be an engineer, I wanted to do all these things, and I was told I shouldn't really try to do those things. So they've had the biggest impact on my career.
Well, my first, I grew up in Wisconsin, so my first job was hassling corn when I was 12, because it was an agricultural state, so child labor was perfectly legal. But I think one of the people who had the biggest impact on my professional career is I got the opportunity to work for President Clinton when I was in my late 20s on the National Economic Council. And one of the things you could do if you worked for the president was send him a decision memo and have him check the box that said yes. So if you do that long enough, it gives you a much more expanded view of what you think is potentially changeable as opposed to fixed. So you realize that many things are the result of human action or inaction as opposed to the laws of physics. So it gave me a very strong sense of agency in terms of the types of problems that I think I can help address. And so I'm always very grateful to President Clinton for allowing me to do a lot of on-the-job training at the expense of the American taxpayer.
Let's keep going that direction.
I'm Mark Pulaski, and the person who had a lot of influence in my life was named Frank Souza. He was a very quiet man, an important leader in his union, and he always taught me that when you're fighting for people who need you, you just keep going, you keep charging ahead whether you're being criticized or not. So I keep charging ahead.
My name is Henry Stern. I'm a state senator down in LA, Ventura County area. I'm going with the Mary Kay approach, first name that pops into my head. Since we're at the Future of Work Commission, I'm my first job, the name's Gustavo. I don't know his last name. He was an expediter at the restaurant I worked at, so my very first job was a busboy. And this guy, Honduran immigrant, been doing that work for about 20 years or so, if I can recall. Taught me how to speak real Spanish, first of all, but also how bad at bussing tables I was. And I was 15 years old. I was just the legal limit to start a job and making that minimum wage and tips and saving up for college and having extra spending money. But he was raising a family of 4, 3-hour bus ride there. And I was a kid from, near the beach, and 2 people living alongside each other doing basically the same kind of job under very different circumstances. Still sticks with me to this day. I still miss that job. I think gave me a sense, it satisfied my ADD to be able to do 9,000 things at once, which is what we try to do in the legislature sometimes, to our peril in some cases, but hopefully for good as well. So I'm grateful to Gustavo wherever you are out there.
Hello? Hi. I'm sorry, you took my industry. But anyway, I also owe it to a restaurant worker in the life that I'm leading at the moment. I told you all last time, I co-founded Raw together with workers from Windows on the World, and that's why I couldn't be here the second day because it was 9/11 and I had to go to New York to be with the workers from Windows on the World. The person who I owe everything to is my co-founder, Fatak Mamdou, who's an immigrant from Morocco, who worked as a waiter in the restaurant and was the shop steward of the union in the restaurant. I learned so much from him. He, before 9/11 in the restaurant, was told by the union that they couldn't strike, but went ahead and led a wildcat strike of all of the workers in the cafeteria of Windows on the World. All 400 workers sat down and refused to work until they got rid of some managers. And so he would tell these stories of workers from all over the world working in that restaurant who just couldn't even barely communicate with each other, but could communicate at another level working in a restaurant. And it's from that origin that we built this national movement of now 130,000 workers from all over the place, all we're coming together. I mean, that to me is the beauty of restaurants, is that people, there's an organic way in which people come together across race and are just thrown together and end up building teams and bonds, and our organization is very much reflective of that spirit of the restaurant. So I owe everything to Mom.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Pepe. I'm a professor at Stanford and the co-director of Stanford Human Centered AI Institute. So I agree with Jane. So many people contributed to who I am today, but the first person who came to my mind is almost the first American I befriended with as a young immigrant teenager kid. His name is Bob Savella. He was my high school math teacher in Parsippany, New Jersey. That was the first town I landed with my family as a non-English speaking teenager. And it was a different kind of segregated life. I was completely isolated. I didn't understand the language. I was working in Chinese restaurants and walking dogs. I had no access to what this world in front of me was like. And it was Bob who took my hand and welcomed me into the life of American high school, into, cultivated my talent in math and science, welcomed me to his home to meet his wife, his kids. He comes from a very modest teacher's family. Both his wife and him are public high school math teachers in New Jersey. And it was them who opened up the best of American values that I carry to this day, the kind of generosity, inclusiveness, kindness, the care for the neighbors, for the community, and so till this day, when I speak of human-centered AI and think of my work, if I have to put a human face it's the Sabella family that has been with me almost like my family and impacted my life.
Good morning. My name is John Marshall with United Food Commercial Workers. The UFCW represents about 1.3 million workers in retail and meatpacking primarily. And as a vegetarian, when I started work,
I wondered how you kept that physique.
that's a secret. I realized I had to sort of grown up of my offenders. And so I started to look in the academic literature, and I discovered a sociologist named Hannah Mera. Really did some fascinating ethnography in the 1960s of butchers and meat packers. Really a very nuanced analysis and sort of surfacing of the way race and gender and class really shaped the occupational categories. And it really helped me gain a better understanding of the industry that I was now working in. But also, as an academic, she was somebody who really combined activism back in the 1960s. She was one of the founders of Women in Research and really sort of was a pioneer for women in her field. She also happened to be a single mom who raised 2 boys. And I never, when I was growing up, read my mom's research. And I was so fortunate to discover 10 years ago that my mother had written this research that was so important to my current career. So as soon as this question was asked, I immediately thought of Mom.
Thank you, Stefan Castro. I'm the CEO of Work at the company here. I'm actually going to do something like, I'm not a big the first one that came to mind, which is my parents, which I would say to me is still the number one source of success in most families is having the right environment and the right role models. But I'm going to try to do something that might be more relevant for the agenda of today, which is going to be about tech and tech policy. So this is somebody who probably doesn't know that he fired me because what he did was very negative. I was born and raised in France, and I graduated from college in 97, I met the guy in 96. Pretty high-ranked government official. This is when Yahoo and Netscape were rising in Silicon Valley, and I wanted to work with tech. And I meet this man, and he tells me the internet is doomed, to me that was the future. And I decided to go to Silicon Valley. I now run a publicly traded billion-dollar company, and it's a big loss for France, probably being made for the US. And so the reason why I'm saying this is because tech policy is hard. I was just reading up these quotes from Niels Bohr, who said predicting is hard, especially in the future. And it's true, and I think whatever we decide here, we need to realize that the future is not set, it's very fast moving, and we need to have agility, we need to think about unintended consequences. We really need to think about one of the things that has made California the place where people like me in Pepe and so many others have come is the attractiveness of the place and the competitiveness and the job creation and the entrepreneurship. And we should really think about the balance between protecting people that need to be protected while at the same time thinking about attracting more young, highly skilled, hardworking people that will create more jobs and better economies for the state. Thank you.
Good morning, I'm Betty B, State Controller, and I do have to say my immigrant parents really had the biggest influence on my life. I grew up with 4 sisters and a brother who became the workforce for a small family laundry dry cleaning business. And I like telling this story because I do think for so many immigrant families that just want to get a foothold into society and the economy, starting a business is a way to do that. But doing this work, watching the sacrifice, really understanding all of that it takes to run a small business, I have to say that the lesson that I carry with me and all the work that I continue to do is that all work for each community.
Good morning, Doug Block with Team 6 Joint Council 7. It's really an honor to be sitting with you all this morning. And my brain went to my father. My great-grandfather Morris, who I never met, came to Seattle around the turn of the century to escape persecution in Eastern Europe of Jews. he started collecting scrap metal in a horse-drawn wagon. And he grew it into a small business, Block Steel, in Seattle, still exists. Before I was alive, I heard the story. Before I was alive, one day, 2 Teamsters showed up at the gate, and somebody went and grabbed my great-grandson and said, there's these big thugs at the door for you. And he went out, and they said, this is the union contract, sign it, we'll be back to pick it up tomorrow. This was a different day and age, and the union only had some the Teamsters. But he made some inquiries, and sure enough, he signed a contract, and he came back to me the next day. My father worked his entire life at Block Steel and eventually became a manager and sat down and bargained across the table with Teamsters Local 174, who, if you ask them, would say that my dad was always stern but fair. And it tells the story of a compact, a labor management relationship that exists to this day that is disintegrating, which is one of the big reasons why we are here. The last thing I'll say is that I was the first Block man not to work at Block Steel. My dad wouldn't let me. He wanted me to do something else, move on to something that he thought was bigger and better. And when I got hired into the Teamsters Union, my dad went around Seattle and showed all of his friends. I'm so proud of my son. He's a union man now.
Good morning, Soraya Coley, I'm president of Cal Poly Pomona. And as so many of you said, there's so many people that touch your lives, and the impact continues. As I reflect on the question, what comes to mind are my parents. I grew up in segregated North Carolina, and my father was a Southern Baptist minister, president of NACP, and instrumental in integrating, working to integrate the schools there in North Carolina, in Goldsboro, our hometown. And a couple of things he said to me stick with me today. And he says, you will rarely be asked to sit at the table of access and opportunity. And therefore you need to be prepared to just bring your chair up to that table, but connect your chair to other chairs to be able to make room for other people who should have that access and opportunity. And that remains today. Another comment and statement he always makes is that the silence of good people affects the pace of change and the achievement of justice. And I think that we see that as well. And that if we are going to affect the change, we must have the courage to lead.
I'm Roy Bahat. I run Bloomberg Beta, which is Bloomberg's venture capital fund. Yeah. Can you hear me now? There we go. Okay. I'm Roy Bahat, and I run Bloomberg Beta, which is Bloomberg's venture capital fund. We focus on, and have always focused exclusively on the future of work. Social media manager, I think, for our commission. If you want to follow me, running commentary. So the person who most influenced me is also my mom, and she moved to this country with no money. She took a role at a nonprofit where she worked for 30 years, and I remember her enjoying and focusing on her daily work with just calm and intensity. And so I both have her to thank as a role model and her to blame, because I remember later in life running into somebody who'd been on the other side of the table from her negotiations, and they said, your mom, she's one tough customer. And I thought, I don't know, it doesn't seem that tough to me. And so that was my standard. And I also think I was blind to a lot of the issues around sexism in the workplace for a long time, because I couldn't possibly imagine a world where women struggled because my mom seemed to, kick a bunch of insert word for appropriate for live streaming here.
Carla Javison, the CEO of Red Up. We invest in and advise employment social enterprises. These are businesses that provide jobs to people who have been in prison, who have been homeless, young people who are not working, not in school, and wraparound supports and opportunity to move on into the workforce. I think I would cite a gentleman I met decades ago who grew up in the South. Let's call him Joe. He grew up in the South. He was a choir boy. He went to Vietnam. He was on the front lines. He was in a lot of brutal combat. He became addicted to drugs. He came back and was discharged in San Francisco. And he became homeless for about 15 years on the streets of San Francisco. He didn't see his family. He didn't go home. Eventually, he got a place to live in something we call supportive housing, a supportive environment, affordable, safe, secure housing. And then he got a job in property services for an adjoining company. And he became a completely different person. I knew him when he first came in off the streets, and then later after he'd been employed. And the last time I saw him, he was returning home for the first time in, I think, 25 years to see his family. And he was anticipating a big greeting from the family, which had missed him, but had been out of touch with them and didn't know where to find him. So, I learned from that safe, secure, affordable housing and a job in a decent work environment with decent pay are the prerequisites of life for everyone and should be available to everyone.
My name is Casey. I lead the California Manufacturers and Technology Association, a trade group based in Sacramento. Just quite simply, as a young boy, routine, that's a job worth doing, it's worth doing right. And I just got to be part of that approach and what I ask for people to work with me and for me. I'll give you the tools and the resources, but it's worth it if we do it right.
Good morning, everyone. Ash Kalra, Assembly Member of District 27 of San Jose. And when I heard the question, especially as in regards to my formative years and how it's connected to the journey that I've been on, the first person that came to mind was Frederick Douglass. Just to the extent that whether it's a blessing or a curse, that if I see or identify or learn about a moral injustice, I can't not think about it anymore. It stays in my mind, and I work to do whatever I can to end that injustice in whatever small way that I can. And so that I attribute to the impact and influence of Douglass.
Good morning. My name is Mariana Vituro. I'm Deputy Director of the National Domestic Workers Alliance. And the first person that came to my mind is actually one of the reasons that I ended up at working with domestic workers is my grandmother. And my grandmother helped raise me and my cousins, and I'd always appreciated her commitment and life of sacrifice. But it was about a little over a decade ago, the last time she came up to stay with my family from Argentina, that I looked at her passport and realized that the name that we had all been calling her our entire lives, we call her Sara, I call her Rosita Sara, was not her name. Her name was actually Concepcion. And that's when I learned that she had been a live-in domestic worker for a family that changed her name from Concepcion to Sara, and when she was very young, and she kept that name. And so in some ways, like her entire identity and self was defined by her domestic work, and she had sort of lost some of her, identity in her actual name. And this, her need for dignity and all the work being dignified also came to bear a few years ago when she needed care. And there was very few options for her as she was in her last period of life, and there was actually no one to care for her, which could made me realize that not only do we all deserve as workers and domestic workers in particular to have our work valued and recognized with dignity, but that all throughout our entire lives we deserve to live and really end our life with dignity. And this really inspires me in working with the Domestic Workers Alliance to not only lift up the workforce and make care jobs good jobs, but also thinking about the care that we all deserve.
We're gonna come back to one other person, Peter, who's, Peter Schwartz, we skipped you. But the question, as you gathered, is who made the biggest difference?
So we've already got, so I get to hear these guys up.
Yeah, but we get to hear you.
Peter Schwartz, I'm the Chief Future Officer of Salesforce. Like many people, there were lots of people who but the one that really comes to mind was a guy named Dick Raymond. And Dick was one of the founders of the Whole Earth Catalog. I'm an old Whole Earthy, I used to write the Whole Earth, I'm the oldest guy here. I just turned 73. But Dick said something very important that really changed my life. He said, if it doesn't take 50 years, it isn't worth doing. And basically forced me to take the long view of what I was trying to accomplish. As it happens, it took me 37 years to do it. I had a vision when I was young, but it took me 37, not 50, so I beat the schedule a bit. But it was absolutely central to my understanding that it was really a development over the course of my life if I wanted to have a real impact. And it really had to shape almost everything I did. So it doesn't take, now you'd probably say maybe 15 years instead of 50 years, but nevertheless, take the longer view.
Julie, are you gonna answer the question too, and then we'll listen to housekeeping? Because last time you did, I don't know if you remember. You start, yeah. We love to hear. Actually, what the commissioners would love is to just pass the mic around. And create the future through our lived experience. Go ahead.
Okay, so it appears our co-chair has now made public comment and assignment for everybody. I just have a few housekeeping items that I wanted to make sure that we covered. And one was that there are cards on your chairs for public comment. We are so grateful that the public is so interested in the work that we're doing here. We do have a full house, and there will be a time at the end of our agenda for each of you to speak. We just ask you to fill out the card and drop it in the basket that is over in the corner. So we do welcome that. And just a reminder that the public comment period is not a question and answer. It is a time for you to address the commission and to be heard. The second is that if you are tweeting today, we do have a hashtag. So the hashtag is right up there on the screen. It's hashtag CA Future of Work. The third is that the Wi-Fi is Stanford Visitor. We are apparently experiencing campus-wide Wi-Fi issues, and just want to assure you that the IT folks are on it, but if you have trouble, that will be why. And the last thing is because I am the labor secretary and it's a busy place of work, I just need to give a little health and safety reminder to the commissioners, which is that you are on chairs that roll with no carpet, so please be careful when you move. And so with that, I'm going to turn this over to James Magika, our co-chair, and ask our first panelist to come and take a seat. And while you are moving, just note that we are here at Stanford, we are in the Silicon Valley. This is a continuing part of our theme of everything begins in California. We can imagine it, we can do it here. And so to have our perspectives on technological change, the future of work right here in the Silicon Valley is very, very exciting for the commission. So I'm going to give it back to James to ask the panelists to go ahead and take a seat.
Thank you very much, Julie. We'd like to welcome our panelists, if they could take their seats, and I'll introduce them shortly. But as you can tell from the agenda here, this session is entitled Perspectives on Technological Change and the Future of Work. And I think it's quite appropriate that we're having this conversation here at Stanford and here in Silicon Valley, because many of the things that are transforming work from a technological standpoint are coming out of this place and this part of the state, and indeed in the state of California. And I think when the issue of technology and technological change comes up, I think one of the things that on people's minds is jobs and automation, artificial intelligence and automation. Questions about will there be enough jobs, what kind of jobs, questions about in what other ways does technology actually change the nature of work itself. Because we know that automation is not the only thing that technology is doing to work. It's also making possible a wider variety of jobs and activities. And it's also allowing us to observe work in ways that we haven't been able to observe before. And I think in talking about technological change and the future of work, we're very, very lucky to have the panelists that we have here, who I'll introduce shortly. First, we've got Ken Goldberg. Ken is the chair of engineering at UC Berkeley and is a roboticist. So I think it's quite appropriate to talk to someone who's actually developing the science and technology for these kinds of systems. We're also fortunate to have Susan Afey. Susan is a professor at Stanford in the economics of technology, so right in that intersection. And if you work on these issues as an academic, but also out in the world, and touch these issues in a variety of ways. So we're also very lucky to have Susan with us. We also have Hal Berrien. Hal was a long-time professor at UC Berkeley, an economist, but also is a chief economist at Google. And earlier when we had the go-around as to what people have influenced your career, I could have mentioned Hal, because in the sense that I think anybody here who's read anything in microeconomics has probably read Hal's book, because he's probably written the books on microeconomics that everybody's read who's ever studied economics. I think many economists in the world have been students of Hal's, either directly or indirectly, so we're lucky to have Hal. The way we're going to do this session is we're trying to make sure we have a conversation. So we've asked our panelists to make some opening remarks for about 10 minutes, and I'll try to hold them to that. Some of them may use slides and presentations, but we're going to hear from them for about 10 minutes each. And then we're going to try and have a conversation with the commission and the commissioners. So I also encourage commissioners when they're ready to jump in. And I think the way we're going to do this when we get to that part of it is if commissioners could put up their card, so at least I know how to get to all of you as we have a conversation. We can have a real conversation. So I think with that, I think it's appropriate that we start with you, Ken, if we could. Partly because you can help us set the ground as to what can the technology now do, and what are the kinds of things that you and others are working on.
Okay, thank you. Do you want the mic or?
Yeah, live stream.
Great, thank you. Okay, so I have to say, it's an honor to be here, and I was interested to see people taking the oath. And I have to say, I've taken an oath too, because I'm a University of California faculty member, and I had to take a loyalty oath when I joined. So happy to be under oath today. What I want to do is cover these topics. I have 50 slides compressed into 10 minutes, as I promised James. So let me jump in here very quickly. The issue, of course, is jobs, and specifically around artificial intelligence. And even now, in that down a little bit more, I want to talk about deep learning, which is the new wave of artificial intelligence that is built on the results of massive data sets, advances in computing, and this new set of algorithms known as deep learning. Now, this has caused a lot of concerns, and we've all seen this reflected in the news. A lot of very intelligent people are saying that we are on the verge of a singularity, of some transition where we will surpass human abilities and make humans obsolete. In fact, many publications are jumping on the same bandwagon. We see this over and over again. This is robots are going to be this widespread stealing of jobs. And this is kind of the vision, that the robots are going to come in and shove the humans out. And we're going to be doomed to sitting around watching YouTube. And I think this is causing a vast amount of automation anxiety. And this, I think, is very important for us in the field to dispel, because I think a lot of it is myth. So I want to address three ideas for you today, and I'll start with the first one, complementarity. So, a lot of this is big concern about this result where Google's DeepMind beat the world champion in the Go. And that's a significant result. It involved a massive amount of computing, a massive amount of innovations in various fronts. But what's really important to keep in mind is the game of Go has the state of the game is what we call fully observed. So there's a 19 by 19 board. The state is either black, white, or empty, and it's static. It doesn't change. Now, in contrast, the environment that we're talking about here, where work is done, in places like driving or taking care of senior citizens or in warehouses or in operating rooms, the state here is completely different. It's very, very high dimensional. The state is not trinary, but they have millions of different values, and it's not static. And moreover, it's uncertain. So we can't determine what's going on in the environment, even like this room. So we are very far from achieving human parity. And so this one thing I want to leave with is that games are not reality. So it's very important to keep those two things in mind. Now we see a lot of those videos when we're watching YouTube, and this is the triumph of robotics. What most people don't wait around for is the end of the video, which is really this is the reality. That's the world we live in. So, even as Elon Musk, who is very confident, but he even admitted recently that to be precise, humans are underrated. Now, I know that Steve will be saying more about self-driving cars and trucks later today, but I want to say right off the bat that this vision, I think we're not going to see this for quite a long time. It's because of environments like this, where you're in a real city and you have double parked vehicles and you have to get around them, and there's an enormous amount of nuance and complexity making that work. So instead of this vision of massive amounts of unemployed truck drivers, angry truck drivers, I don't think we're going to see that. I think we're going to see just the opposite. And I know Hal is going to put this much more eloquently, but I think we're going to see a shortage of human workers in the future. Now, I also want to say that the difference between robots and AI systems and humans are very important to make. So, whereas AI systems are very good at calculation, precision, and objectivity, we as humans, we are very good at these complementary set of skills: understanding, empathy, dexterity. And so I want to offer this term, complementarity, which I think is a way of characterizing the fact that robots and humans are not in opposition or in competition. They actually complement each other in very profound ways. So I use this example. Some of the younger generation won't know what I'm talking about, but this is it's Spock and Kirk, and they work together. Spock was all about logic, he's like AI, and Kirk was all the human, the heart, and Kirk had the empathy and the intuition and creativity, and they weren't fighting each other. Well, sometimes they did, but generally they got along and they worked together. So it's not about replacing the human with the robot; it's about taking the robot out of the human. Now, so this has also been talked about. There's a lot being written here. I'm not the only one saying this, but it's artificial intelligence plus intelligence amplification. The next point I want to make is about what I call inclusive intelligence. So today, artificial intelligence, as I see it, is exclusionary. It's arcane. There's a lot of very complex mathematics involved with it. It's not accessible because of the need for computing in large data sets. It's centralizing. There's very few big players who dominate the field, and it's polarizing. It's creating a lot of anxiety. It's exactly the kind of thing we're here at this meeting to talk about, the separation between the haves and the have-nots. So inclusive intelligence is a way of thinking about this, where we need to start thinking about intelligence and AI in an inclusive way. So inclusive in the sense of diverse populations, especially those who are most vulnerable to the decisions being made for parole and mortgage decisions, and inclusive in the sense of the spectrum of human and artificial intelligence. So I've been writing articles about this, an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal. There's a report that we put out last year, Cognitive Diversity, AI in the Future of Work, that was also covered in The Economist. In particular, Tony Blair said that AI will allow us to do what it is that we are uniquely meant to do, to focus on high-level thinking, strategy, and paving the way for innovation. So AI, rather than being a threat, will actually relieve us of the drudgery so we can focus on the important things. And there's an element of this that has to do with diversity. I won't go into it just now, but it's not us versus the machines, but it's how we can start working together with machines in new ways. The last point is this, that the skills that managers in the recent surveys say that they will need to succeed are listed here. Many of them have to do with creativity, social networking, collaboration, people skills. And this idea of human capital, I think, is so important. We're talking about everyone needs to learn how to code these days, especially kids. I don't know. I think that kids need more time to learn how to get along with other kids, how to talk and interact and do what we're doing here today, is to communicate in a very deep way. So rather than schools being emphasizing conformity, which is all about the old school way, which is still dominant in many schools today, we should be emphasizing creativity, diversity, variety, collaboration, and innovation. And so there's talk about the fourth industrial revolution. You all know that story, that we've moved from steam to electricity to computing to intelligence, but I think the last part is wrong. I think rather than emphasizing the fourth industrial revolution, it's not about intelligence in that same way, but it's really about humans. But the new industrial revolution is humans. We need to invest in that human capital. That is something that's been lacking up until now. So there's also talk about lifelong learning, that it's not just about learning K through 12, but learning has to continue throughout one's education beyond college. And so rather than deep learning, I want to propose to you wide learning. I think that's something that has been neglected. I think it's an opportunity that California could take the lead on. So these are the 3 points I want to leave you with. Complementarity, that AI is not against us. It's not something that we have to fight against it either or. Inclusive intelligence, and we can rethink our agenda, researching intelligence to include many new populations, and wide learning. That rather than just deep learning, we should be emphasizing width. Thank you.
And thank you for that. A couple follow-on questions, just to keep us in sort of some conversation before we get to Susan and to Hal. 2 things. You described some general trends around technology, but do these affect different jobs in the same way? Because we know that there are some jobs, for example, in manufacturing, that are declined as a result of roboticization. So is this effect that you described in them? And the second follow-on question is, so would we be wrong in focusing on coding as the skill that everybody seems to need to have, given what you just suggested?
Good. Okay, so to your first one, Jason, I completely agree with you in terms of the distinction you made between replacing jobs and replacing skills. So I think that's actually a very, very important distinction to continue to make, and it is not even at all. There's very big distinctions between different kinds of jobs. But I believe that jobs that involve manual dexterity are very safe. Anyone doing plumbing or construction or car repair, I can tell you through robotics, front lines, we're nowhere close to replacing those kind of jobs. But certain kinds of jobs that involve filling out forms, that just essentially just doing routine work, there is some aspects of there. And there's a term robotic process automation, which I find troubling because it's not really robotics, but it's labeled under that, but it's automated filling out forms like autocomplete. That is starting to actually become very effective. And I do think that's going to affect the number of jobs in the future. And your second point was about questions?
Well, I'll just ask you about coding. So you encourage that, we need to be teaching different kinds of skills, but as you know, in the current dialogue today, there's a persistent view that we should encourage everyone to learn code.
Yes. So I have to say, I'm on the faculty of computer science, but I would be the first to say I don't think everyone needs to code. I think that there's a trend I read recently that preschoolers can learn to code now. I think they learn what they need to be focusing on is how to share. That's much more important. So, not coding, everyone doesn't need to code. It's important to know how we're coding is, but I think that we are lacking, and I can tell you, many of my colleagues, my students, and even myself, we lack the social skills. And those skills are things that, because we spend so much time coding, really, that we didn't have enough time to talk, hang out, and play. So I think that those things are actually the things we need to be doing.
Well, thank you. I can see at least one commissioner nodding vigorously today, but why don't we move over to Susan? I mean, you can think about the economics of these things quite extensively.
This is working well. Okay, great. So I wanted to start out by just talking about the perspectives I'm bringing to the problem. And I think one amazing privilege I have as a professor at Stanford is that I can ask myself, what is the most important thing I could be working on right now, given my skills and background, of course, to solve the world's problems, both in terms of education and research and also in thought leadership. And so some of the things I've been moving towards recently are in this area because I do think it is really one of the most important topics we can think about. So, for example, we've launched this Institute for Humans and Artificial Intelligence that Faith is the director of. I'm an associate director, and one of the things that we're really thinking about is the impact of AI on inequality and the workforce. And we're also thinking about the issue that Ken raised, which is how can we make artificial intelligence research move more in the direction of augmenting and complementing humans rather than replacing them. And so I think actually a lot of that will happen naturally, but there's something special about automation in this latest sort of revolution, which is that there's very much of a general purpose technology. So the same kinds of tools and techniques can be adapted across domains relatively quickly. That's a moment where actually our universities and our government research programs have outsized impact, because if they do the right basic R&D, that lowers the cost of adoption across the board. And so I believe that we can actually realistically change the trajectory of research to be more in this augmenting direction. And so if we do that, that will make it more likely that companies will also move in that direction, because the groundwork has been laid. A second thing that I'm working on, I've just founded a new organization at GSB called the Golub Capital Social Impact Lab. And we are actually out on the front lines trying to work with startups and governments to build technology and evaluate and improve technology that helps workers and also helps in education. Again, taking this idea of general purpose technology, but actually putting it into practice. And part of that, that effort is really based on the idea that we're at a moment where technology can be used for good. And again, this idea that it's general purpose technology, if we can crack the nut of making training more personalized in a variety of ways, that can be spread and duplicated and scaled across areas. So just to think a little bit about the opportunities. We have a lot of people who are lacking something to move into more fulfilling careers. So first we need to do the research to understand what are those frictions? What is it that's getting in people's way? Some of it is geographic mobility. And of course, what are the impediments to geographic mobility? It's not just picking up and moving, it's knowing what your career path will be, understanding where you will land, understanding the housing side of the equation, the networking side of the equation. So if that's a friction, there are actually ways that policies can address that. Another thing, there might be certain skills, especially if you've grown up in a background without a lot of familiarity with say, white-collar professional environments, you might not know about writing emails or being able to communicate. Some of the soft skills that are required to have a certain kinds of role. And so, but those things are things that in the end we can help guide people through at scale. A third part is meeting people where they are. So if you're trying to transition, you might have childcare responsibilities, elder care responsibilities, and a lot of parts of California, long commutes. And so when on earth are you going to work in the time to get this training? Even if you knew exactly that this training or re-education or skill acquisition would actually be helpful to you. The first you have to believe that it would be helpful, and then you have to fit it in. But again, there's a lot we can do with technology to solve that. Everybody has mobile devices now. And so we can meet people where they are, on the bus, on the train, while they're sitting on the floor of a dark room, while their children are not quite asleep. There are lots of moments, but then also the education and the material needs to be delivered in a bite-sized, engaging way. And again, be able to fit into shorter bursts of free time. These are new opportunities that have been opened up for us. And of course, some of these things they're not going to be well suited. We're not going to succeed in coming up with technical solutions. But if we can just cover some portion of them through low-cost delivery of things that work, that's an opportunity. Although it's not going to solve everything, it's something that we can invest in, and I think we should. Let me now switch topics to a third topic. So a lot of my academic research historically focused on marketplaces. One of the reasons that marketplaces are really interesting to economists is that they can help people become entrepreneurs, and they can also actually provide a lot of the support for people to run their own business. So when you think about, of course, Uber drivers and so on are sort of top of mind, but there's actually lots and lots of people who might be able to be an entrepreneur, to go out on their own, whether it's an electrician or an interior designer or a teacher. There are lots of careers where you could be a small business owner, but there are so many impediments. There are impediments to managing scheduling, doing logistics, learning how to advertise, figuring out benefits, even managing the business. But one of the things that technology is able to potentially solve is to assist people with all of those
skills, those skills might be pretty hard for certain, to acquire if you haven't kind of grown up in the trade or grown up with a lot of education around those types of skills. And platforms are starting to provide those types of support. Another example that I think is very interesting for the future are older workers. So we're going to see more and more people, they live longer, they're going to need to have a second act. So you might have had a first full-time job in a, traditional employment, whether in manufacturing or in teaching. You spent your whole career under one set of labor situations, but then you would like to earn money in a second career, but you don't want to work full-time and you can't get another job like that. Maybe there's some parts of the job that are challenging. They're physically challenging, they're mentally challenging, you have to remember things, that can be very stressful. But AI and technology can actually remove a lot of those barriers. They can remove the memorization barriers, the fear of making a mistake, of giving the wrong pill. A lot of those challenges that might prevent someone from being in a certain profession, whether it's helping people with medical issues, home healthcare, things like that, can actually be augmented with technology. And also, I think older workers really value flexibility. And so again, we would like to be able to provide people with those opportunities. So generally, when we think about this switch to a more flexible workforce, it's partly being driven by changes in business models, marketplaces. So marketplaces, again, provide a lot of services to allow people to launch their own career. Also, technology, in some sense, changes the cost-benefit analysis for barriers to entry. Occupational licensing, training, memorizing maps. We're seeing that some of the things that made it harder or unsafe to enter an industry, that cost-benefit calculus changes when I can augment people with technology. And so whatever we think about all this, it's going to happen. There's going to be a trend that it's going to be easier to get into certain professions because the educational barriers have reduced. And so I think meeting people where they are, meeting the changes in productivity where they are is a really important thing for us to consider. If workers are more flexible, how do they get their health care met? And rather than sort of stopping some of these inevitable forces of change, instead, I think we should think about how to support people with the healthcare they need, with the social safety nets they need to manage those transitions. And then there will be other areas where it continues to be most productive to have full-time workers who stay a long time because of the training requirements, because of the human capital acquisition. And then we should also be thinking about how to invest in making those types of industries grow. But in some sense, there are national changes, and it's going to be hard to stop those in the end. A final point that I think is maybe insufficiently discussed in all of this is actually there's two sides to the equation for a worker. One is their wages, the other are their costs. And of course, the low-wage worker also is a Walmart consumer. And actually raising prices at Walmart hurts low-wage workers more, a lot. I mean, it's very important for low-wage workers to be able to buy goods cheaply and efficiently. It's important for them to get their transportation needs met efficiently. And so actually thinking about things like transportation policy from a worker perspective is super important. Obviously, we know we need to build more housing. That seems to be a bit of a logjam. So this commission probably may or may not be able to actually change zoning. Kudos if you can. Something that might be a little bit easier though is to think about the transportation element of housing costs. If I can cut people's commute times, then that's a huge increase in their cost of living. It's like increasing the supply of land and allowing more workers to access high-paying jobs. So it's just insane that we have all of these people commuting 2 hours into low-wage jobs because high, relatively high salaries in the middle of the day and can't get people here. We can make it easier for them to get here. That would be like an increase in their wages. And so thinking about that side of the equation. And of course, why else do people want to live certain places? For high quality education, high quality health care. But these are things that governments actually are supposed to do. We are supposed to educate people. We are supposed to give people high quality education, even if they live in not the best neighborhood. We should still be able to provide them high quality education. We should still be able to provide them high quality health care. So I think thinking about technology and improving the quality of education, decreasing the cost of healthcare, and just anything we can do that reduces the housing costs through transportation or other policies are really pro-worker policies. So these are things that I hope are stay part of that conversation as we go forward. Thanks.
Susan, thank you. And I think if you had been at the first meeting that we had, I think you'd appreciate the resonance in some of what you just said, especially some of these, I think we called it in the last week, these work adjacent issues, whether it's housing, transportation, and how they affect workers and the cost side of this. So thank you for that. Well, the one area I wanted to follow up on very quickly, though, is you talked quite a bit about the importance of soft skills, also the importance of augmentation that these technologies can actually provide and so forth. I'm just curious if you could comment on what you think, and we may come back to this later too, by the way, wider conversation, what the implication of that is to wages. Because I'm thinking about the examples that you gave where you mentioned we may lower access by automating the map reading or needing to memorize maps and all of those kinds of things. And that the fact that you might actually make soft skills quite important. But we don't have a good history of valuing in the labor market soft skills very well. In terms of, a lot of people that have soft skills, caring work and so forth. And also, when we complement work, how do we make sure that the wage implications of that actually work out as they should? So I'm just curious if you could comment on the wage effects of what you just described.
Yeah, so let me actually break that answer into two parts. So I think in thinking about like flexible work, I think that enabling flexible work, it may be very good for workers on aggregate, but it might be different workers, people who can come into the labor market, whether it's parents, people with elder care responsibility, students who are going from basically not monetizing an hour at all to being able to monetize the hour. That might be very important for say, students who are paying their own way through college or community college, just to be able to work where you just couldn't use those hours before at all. That is very beneficial for those workers going from zero to positive. There may be a different set of workers a much smaller set of workers who used to value, would have benefited from a different structure of providing that service. And again, it might, if you're looking for that sort of full-time job, it just might be that now your productivity is higher in an adjacent industry. So we need to think about transitions into those industries. Of course, on the consumer side, there's a dramatic expansion of output. And I think that's something that people forget about. It's just, when you have a huge, by lowering the cost of the service, which is basically because the opportunity cost of the person's hour was pretty low between classes. They weren't going to do anything else, so now they're going out and working. That's going to lower the cost, and of course that leads to a huge expansion of output. Rather than thinking, okay, we just can't have that output expansion, we can think about that output expansion is now picking up one part of the labor force, and then the other parts can adjust. The second piece, I think, is a different issue about what happens to workers within firms as these types of skills and job change. I think it's a much more subtle issue. I don't think it's pretty hard to predict exactly how it's going to play out. You think about something like an administrative assistant who used to serve 10 people. Now in a lot of companies, everybody does their own calendaring, so the same administrative assistant might serve 200 people because they only have to deal with exceptions and they're doing a lot of their own work. Well, that administrative assistant who's left might still be paid as much or actually more because they're handling exceptions, but there's just less of them from a self-serve perspective. So, if you're someone with an old set of skills, that might be bad for you in terms of wages, but there's then a new set of people coming in, smaller set of people, higher wages. So I think that I think the answer is really, it depends. How does the technology affect the productivity of the workers who remain? But also, what's the next best opportunity for a person with the skills that were changed? I think it is certainly the case that in some industries there are profits to be shared, and thinking about how much of those profits go to workers versus the profits of the owners versus the consumers is an important question. I think the one that's maybe a little bit easier, less ambiguous to think about is actually just competition. We also want to avoid monopolies. The worst case scenario for all of us is that, workers' wages fall and consumer prices rise, because the workers are also consumers. And so, that's generally a bad outcome. We need enough competition. And so that's another area of thinking about, there can really be different outcomes. If you have something like cloud computing where there's multiple firms competing to provide cloud computing, then a lot of the R&D is done by a couple of firms. But actually, anybody can enter and they don't have to invest in machine learning, they don't have to invest in computing infrastructure, they don't have to build maps, they don't have to build voice to text. They can just start a business with all of that R&D already done. So that kind of industry structure, where there's a few firms, but more than one, critically more than one, that do that R&D and make the services available for a low cost, can then lead to lots of competition, lots of entrants in the services and goods that are being built, and then lead to low prices for consumers. If instead you had, say one vertically integrated robotics firm that did all the robotics work and built all of our goods and charged high prices for consumers, that would be a bit of a disaster. I think we're not seeing that in cloud computing and in robotics today, but I think it's something that we need to be really careful going forward, whether it's self-driving cars or anything else, to make sure that the industry structure evolves in such a way that the prices stay low and the benefits to consumers are experienced.
Thank you. I'm sure we'll come back to these other issues in wider conversation, but let's turn to Hal.
Okay, let's see. Okay, I'm gonna try it from here. Let's run through this presentation. I had a very pretentious name, Automation and Personalization. But actually I decided to use a shorter name, Hots and Hots, which covers the same game for everybody. So I'm going to give you a little economics here about my textbook. This guy featured column. There's demand and supply, determines the wage, the level of employment, and everybody is concerned now because the demand curve for human labor is shifting in because of the automation being a substitute. But people tend to forget that the supply curve is shifting in too because of demography. And as I'll show you in a few minutes, in virtually every developed country, you're seeing a dramatically increased, more rapid aging in the population, and so that's going to reduce the supply of workers. Everybody who retires expects to continue consuming, but of course we've got one less worker, and you've got some less output, so the question is we have to make sure that there is something for them to consume. So the supply, that's the top side, the demand, that's the bottom side, so we can just talk about each of these for a few minutes. Bots. So this issue's been around for a long time. Jobs get 2016, robots will steal your job. 1980, robots after your job. They've been for jobs in outer space in 1960, 1935, thinking machines replacing the thinker, and of course we can go back to 1812, where the machinery was replacing believers. But lately there's a new theme. Here's America's growing labor shortage. It's construction, agriculture, truck drivers, forklifts, dairy farms, on and on and on. It's hard to find workers now. And most people would attribute that primarily to the macroeconomic environment, which is pretty positive. But actually, there's a longer run issue as well, and that's the changing demographics. So there were two big shocks to the labor market in the last century. One of them was the baby boomers. So there's a baby dearth during the Depression and World War II. After World War II, so I think baby boom, then the baby bust on top of that, and it was the echo baby boom later. Nice demographic patterns. Well, what's happening now, of course, is the baby boomers are all retiring. And the baby boomers are followed by the baby bust. That means that the ensuing generations, there's less of them. The other big effect, huge effect, was women entering the labor force. So we saw participation rates of about half that of this down to around 85%. Now, that is pretty much saturating, as you can see. We're not going to have another baby boom. We're not going to have another surge of workers into the labor force from these effects. In fact, I think a lot of the intuitions we have about the 20th century are really not going to apply in a natural way in the 21st century. So let's give you some examples later on. Of For that, I want to say a couple words about jobs and tasks. Automation doesn't generally eliminate jobs, but it eliminates results via repetitive tasks. They could be manual, they could be cognitive, and yes, if you eliminate all the tasks that are associated with the job, then it will eliminate a job, but that's very rare. In fact, Besson looked at 270 detailed occupations listed in the 1950 census, only one of them, only one has been eliminated due to automation. Might make a minute about that. There it is. Elevator operator. But these elevator operators did lots of other things. They were safety monitors, security monitors, they greeted people, they delivered packages, they answered questions, et cetera. Those tasks are still with us, right? They're still receptionists, they're still security people, they're still package delivery people. It's just that they're wrapped around the tasks and their jobs have changed. And most jobs, I would say, are more complicated than we think. There's a wonderful service from the Department of Labor called GO-Biz. For every job application, and there's around 1,500 job applications, they will show you the skills, the tasks that are necessary to do that occupation. And there's a list for groundskeeper, not a high-paid job, but they have a huge variety of different tasks. And as Ken pointed out, these tasks generally are too complex for a computer. Now, if you have $1 billion and 10 years, and you put a Pepe on this, you can automate one or two of these tasks, I would say. But automating them all is very, very complex. And you can go through a lot of tasks that have to stay, a lot of jobs that have to stay at the same time. Oh, yeah, it goes on, there are 35 of them. Look at the tasks that you do. If your garden looks like that, you could probably get a robotic. But the point is, you have to simplify the environment to make it feasible for automation. I grew up in an orchard. I know orchards look like that, but not quite as nice. But this is what an orchard looks like today. It's amazing. The trees are 6 feet tall. The apples grow on only one side of the tree because they wrestle around them up against the fence. They did this because it made the job easier, simpler, more controlled for the worker. Right? It's much easier to pick apples here than to climb up a ladder the way we had to do. But of course, that also means that a robot just might be able to do that job because it's been simplified to such a degree that it might be up to, the technology might be up to. And in fact, here's a workers, humans, who are pruning the apple trees, and over here is a robot that is actually picking apples. Maybe not quite at the production level yet, but we can see that coming. But it only happened because you dealt with this simplified structure here rather than the complex structure there. So of course, there's a lot of issues. What tasks can be automated, might be automated in the future? You could get a lot of different answers. There's a group at Oxford who said it's about 45%, PricewaterhouseCoopers, et cetera. In fact, there's a technology review that has a whole list of the different studies that look at this demand for labor issue. If you look at the 10 largest occupations in the US, it's really a fascinating slide. Retail salesperson, cashier, food prep, office clerk, that is 21% of total employment, just those 10 jobs. It's really quite remarkable. And some of those jobs, well, all of them are in services, that's 80% of prime employment. Some of those jobs can be automated. I think we're going to see fewer cashiers in the future, almost certainly. But some of them would be very difficult to automate, like a customer service representative would be, again, a job that requires a lot of the soft skills we heard about a few minutes ago. This is a slight digression. We hear a lot of talk in California about the guaranteed annual income, the basic annual income. But we don't hear much talk about the work week. And if you look at the work week, back in the 1800s, it was around 60, 70 hours a week that people were working. The cows didn't know it was Sunday. They didn't know it was Saturday. If you look at, even now, when we look across space, Mexico, there's a whole extra day to work week. Here in the US, it's about 38 hours a week. The Netherlands, 29-hour work week. 29-hour work week, a whole day less than us. And the reason is they've really put the infrastructure in place to support part-time we think of as part-time work, 4 days a week rather than 5. And that's a dimension that can be adjusted. We know it can be adjusted because of this variety of work week choices of the different countries. All right, now, because of what I described, I think that I'm relatively optimistic about the total demand for labor, the total supply of labor. We're going to, again, I'll continue to argue in a moment that we're going to have a tight labor market for several decades. But education and training will still be necessary because you've got to match up people to jobs in a way that's useful to both sides of that matching. And of course, as I just said, obligatory slide showing that education has lower employment, lower unemployment and higher wages. Can technology help deliver on-the-job skills? Yes, it does, and it does today. This isn't science fiction. You look at YouTube, there are 1 billion views a day of how-to videos. And I bet everyone in the room has used that for something. It could be how to solve quadratic equation, it can be how to repair a screen door, it can be how to make an extra cake, whatever. If you think about it, never before in human history have we had this widespread availability of instructional material. Now, that's not all you need, of course. You need teachers, you need coaches, you need people who can help students with this material, but the material itself is pretty widely available on a global basis, which I think will have profound repercussions going into the future. These are the examples of the cognitive skills from the Khan Academy. Here's some manual skills, how to weld cast iron, how to remove a strip mold, how to put a glass pipe on, that you can acquire this knowledge on an as-needed basis, which is not the case historically. And this is something that Susan mentioned. It used to be that being a cashier required knowing how to make change. Well, that's gone. It used to be being a writer means you had to know how to spell. Thank God we don't have that anymore. Taxi drivers, hospitalities. Actually, Faith has a nice example. It used to be to be a veterinarian, you had to recognize dog breeds, but now, thanks to the dog project in Stanford, your phone can recognize dog breeds. So there's a skill gap. You know, we always seek to bring the worker up to what the skill demand is from the employer, but it's not necessarily true to bring the required skills down because people can acquire them more easily using this kind of cognitive assistance. So we've heard about a couple times now. I'm going to skip the summary slide and hop right into demography. I'm going to skip the productivity too because this is the critical slide here. This is what the growth of the labor force has looked like in the historical data and what will look like in the 2020s and 2030s, 2040s. In the 2020s, this decade we're entering in a few months, we're going to see the lowest growth in the labor force ever. And it doesn't get much better after that in the 2030s and 2040s. After 2050, it kind of aligns pretty well. This is really the reproduction of World War II. You go back and look at what caused it. There's a plot I had a moment ago about the births. Down here, you see the growth in population, the growth in labor force. The labor force is growing at half the rate of the population. And without immigration, you would see the labor force actually falling in the U.S. I haven't seen that in a long, long time. Labor force participation rates by men and women both declining as they age generally. You see it's going to have quite a differential impact from state to state. Look up at New England, where there's going to be a huge labor force shortage. Same thing in most of the northern U.S., Nevada, Utah, Texas are looking good in the sense of having a young population. California's kind of in the middle. So I think in your report, it's very important to look at some of these demographic trends as well as the demand side for labor. Skip that one. Well, yeah, you can think of this as 25 to 30 years, we're going to see tighter labor markets. Quite unlike what we saw in the 20th century. And that's important to recognize that the old individuals may no longer apply in those conditions.
Yes. So how, we'd love to.
This is the last slide.
Okay, good.
And we're in good shape compared to other countries. If we look at Japan, they have a real demographic crisis, Korea, Spain, Italy, Germany, France, on and on and on. All the developed countries are getting older. The developing countries in Africa, in India, they are getting younger. So we fast forward 15 years into the future, there are going to be, I think, global repercussions or global realignment because of the demographic trends. Okay, thank you.
Hal, thank you. I'd like to start to open this up a little bit, but I'd like to start with a question, I think, for you on something that I think both you and Susan, I think to some extent Ken also, a point that you generally all made, which is there's going to be massive labor demand. So we're not going to have a shortage of demand for work, whether it's because of demographic arguments or whether it's because we're augmenting rather than replacing. Actually, you generally all made that point. But can't speak to this though, which we're seeing a little bit of it today, which is even in a relatively tight labor market, wages are hardly moved. Speak to the future world where there's enough demand. Speak to the quality of that work in the jobs, both in terms of what they are, what they pay. So talk more or less about the demand question, but rather the quality nature of that work, both today and the future.
Well, I'll start out with a couple observations about the point about wages now, but it is a bit of a question. Economists are not aligned on the answer, but it's primarily due, I think, to a lot of people who were not in the labor force who are entering into the labor force because employment is much more readily available. So we worked our way through most of that, and if you look at the low end of the labor market, the low skilled workers, they are seeing wage increases. They're seeing higher wage increases as a percentage basis than the middle or even the upper end. So it is something that's looking to shape, and I think as we look at the demographic forces I just mentioned, that's going to continue to be the case in the future.
I'm good. Susan, wanted to add to that before the question.
Yeah, not to beat a dead horse, but I think that one thing that's often missing from the labor market pictures that we see is the cost of living. And so David Otter and Anna Solomons had a recent paper where they looked at the wage premium for cities versus rural areas. And they found that for less educated workers, there used to be a wage premium in the cities, and that wage premium has disappeared. And so if you think about why people are feeling unhappy, even if your overall things are tight, if the job is in a city where you don't get a premium and you commute 2 hours or are crammed into a tiny apartment in order to access that job, that doesn't make you happy. And so that's one of the reasons I really want to focus on access to jobs at the same time. And we actually just haven't done enough research on that. One of the big things I'm thinking about now is and this is a very early stage, is to try to really systematically document empirically what people's frictions are. Because I think that there's a lot of hypotheses. There's hypotheses about mobility. There's hypotheses about who your family makes it harder to move to jobs, for example. There's hypotheses about information. There's hypotheses about credentialing. But we actually don't have a ton of evidence to answer those questions. One challenge, actually, this coming back to California, what we do in California, is we have very bad data in the U.S. We don't follow people over time the way they do in a lot of other countries. And so it's actually really hard to study in the United States people's frictions and people's career paths. I'm working with Justin Casey's and a RIP organization, which has got a big grant from the NSF in Rhode Island, to try to build a tool to help workers access training programs in a personalized way based on the value added of the training program for the individual worker. We could do that in Rhode Island because we access the administrative data in Rhode Island. We could do more. California might also be a part of that. And so thinking about actually having the right data to be able to answer the questions, and also if we intervene, to be able to measure the impact of these interventions would be quite important.
Yeah, let me, if I may, Ken, so to jump in. I'd like to start to go to the commissioners. And I'm going to start with Mary Kay, then Peter, and then Roy. I think they have order right. So if you want to go first, then I might encourage us to find some of these questions so we get everything right.
I'm gonna
follow the guidelines of participation on e-pithy and James. So I'm picking one thing per speaker that I'm just curious about, that was, struck me as something that doesn't resonate with my either experience, but I don't have evidence or data. So I just want, so the automation anxiety that you spoke of, Ken, my lived experience, I just want to share through a story. Fast food workers, 4 million, welcome the introduction of automation and technology and artificial intelligence in their work, but they have zero access or opportunity to have their minds be used in the design. And so for the workers that I'm in most relationship with in the service and care sector, it's not about automation anxiety, it's inequality anxiety. And so I wanted to sort of reintroduce a notion that I think keeps getting hammered about automation, when for working people, if there was a trust that government, employers, and academic would welcome our minds into it, we could see a big explosion, is my belief. And then, Susan, you said at the end, low-wage workers need these other supports, and Mariana and I were like, low-wage workers want to end low-wage work. And you made that point as an afterthought at the end that I just want to connect, because I was so proud you said it, that there's the question of profits and work has to get relinked in the economy. And so I think we have to think about questioning the existence of poverty wage jobs in California as a way to imagine the quality that I heard James kind of hinting at. So I was curious if that resonates, and then how the work week may be dropping statistically, but for the 64 million people that are stitching a life together, their 3 jobs ends up meaning they're working 80 to 100. And I don't hours a week. So I feel like our work week explosion for the vast majority of people in the economy is we are working harder and harder and can't get ahead. And so that disconnect between hard work and progress, I think we just have to change. I hope that automation and technology can eliminate that gap and reduce our work week, because people can't care for themselves or their children any longer because of that. And it doesn't seem like that sort of vast inequality is showing up in the analysis. So I'm just curious about the reactions to those 3 things.
Great. So can I jump in? Mary Kay, thank you for that. I think that it also, your point about the fast food workers, that example echoes in some sense what I wanted to say to James' question as well, which is, I think you're making a great point about the quality of work, that this is shifting, and that this important part of this is this idea of trust or engagement, or what I call inclusivity, that we need to, we think technologies have to be developed in partnership with workers. And I think that one aspect of this is when we talk about something like customer care or tech support, those actually jobs are fairly well paid. The interesting thing is many companies can't hire enough tech support workers. For example, 2 of the companies who do this very well, who actually do enormously, provide enormously comprehensive tech support, we all know, we work with all the time, Apple and Amazon. And I don't think it's accidental that those are 2 of the most profitable companies in the world. Now, the idea though for good customer care, as you know, if you've been on the other end of it, is someone who has these skills to be able to empathize. I know what happened, I know how you feel. And what's interesting is, and I want to say one thing, we talked about soft skills this morning, and I really feel we should change that language, because I think that responding to an angry customer requires a skill that's not soft at all. It's very hard to do that. So it's just as hard to be empathetic and caring and really responsive as it is to solve a differential equation or change a complex circuit board. So I think that we should call those people skills. And those are the things we need to invest in the future. And those are going to bring us quality jobs.
Well, I'm going to go to, sorry, Susan, I just want to jump in on the same point. I wanted to go to Peter and then to Troy.
Thank you, James. First of all, compliments to the panel. A great set of choices to staff. Couldn't be more relevant than presentations. So thank you on that. Just a couple of quick observations that I think, just following up on something that Susan just said. Paul Valery, the poet, once said, "The future isn't what it used to be." And what he meant was that essentially, for most of human life, life didn't change much. My grandfather's life was like my grandchildren's life. And now the challenge, of course, is that it's no longer true. My kid's no longer like my life, and his children will not be like his, and so on. Basically, changed so much. So the issue, and this goes in part to the question of the meaning of automation, e.g., it's whether it's done to you or you do it with you. And unfortunately, the way we conceive of a lot of it is it's done to the workers as opposed to done with the workers. And if you think about the pace of change in the past, you could imagine reasonably in the workshop where you improved how you worked in the blacksmiths, or if you worked in a machine shop, you did it together. Now, in the large complex systems we have, very hard to actually do with. But I think that's part of the challenge, is how do you take the workforce with you in that process. I totally agree with essentially everything Ken Goldberg said, in terms of, there's so much mythology around AI and robotics. It's all bad science fiction. I know I write good science. And so, I mean, you know, we don't need to worry about Governor Schwarzenegger coming through as a Terminator anytime soon. Not going to happen. And so I think part of the task we have is to disabuse society of those dark fantasies. It doesn't mean there aren't real issues, but those aren't the issues, right? So I'm so glad Ken took all of that off the table, and he emphasized something quite critical. I work in a company that hires thousands of coders. The actual important thing we actually look for is not only coding skills, ability to work with other people. Because you rarely sit there by yourself. You're part of a big team, you collaborate, and so on. So empathy in many ways, collaboration, these are the right skills to think about. I think Ken, again, Hal, I totally agree with. And here I think we have some real challenges. I just came from a meeting in Hawaii, where the governor had organized with many of the same challenges we're talking about, right? And you think about Hawaii, 1.5 million people, cost of living 30% higher, right? They're about to kill the 30-millimeter telescope because there's fundamental conflict between local communities and the progress of science, right? And it's going to die. And it's going to affect further development in Hawaii. You can just see it, science is going to begin to unwind. So finding that kind of balance of how do you do those kinds of developments and how do we sustain that development, even in California. So my question for us is the cost of labor and the cost of living, right? The inability to build housing is directly a function of CEQA. Every governor for God knows how long has been talking about CEQA reform. No one has been willing to challenge that. And if we can't challenge that, we're going to have a fundamental housing problem. And if we're not prepared to challenge immigration, we're going to have a fundamental demographic problem. So I think that's quite fundamental. And just to conclude, we've talked a little bit about Singapore. Singapore has had to deal with all of these issues: the baby bust, the inability to sustain immigration, and has looked at what it takes to keep the older workforce around much longer. I'm 73. I started a new career at 65. I'm the future. It's true. And so you're all going to look like me soon. And none of you is going to retire. All of you are going to want to hang around longer, like me. And so the interesting question is, how do we manage that transition to an older workforce, give them the skills, capabilities, etc., to be the kind of workers we need? And Singapore has met that challenge brilliantly.
If I could, we're going to take a couple more. So, and also keep in mind that this is much a conversation amongst the commissioners as it is with the panelists. So this is a group conversation. So I'm going to go to Roy and then Mariana.
Yeah, I'm trying to get bunched with any because I think some of the themes are the same. So, sorry. I'm just saying, I'm trying to get bunched with any other questions. And Susan, I really appreciated the fact that you drew the direct connection to some of the issues in the present with getting work. And while I agree with much of what was said, I think my sentiment question is, do you guys think the status quo is kind of the present right now is basically okay, and we should be thinking about the irony of this commission's named after the future of work? And well, don't worry too much more about the future. I'm curious from a sentiment perspective on, are we in a state of crisis now due to these issues or not? And the related question to that, if I can ask it maybe a more difficult question, is how you were describing the issue with wages about supply and demand of labor. All of you have perspectives on the presence of large companies, and especially large technology companies in this. Do you believe that monopoly power or platform power, however put, especially by large companies and large technology companies, is part of the issue?
Before you answer, Hal, let's get Mariana.
My question, piggybacks off of that, and in some ways, like, I think on the last commission gathering, there was nothing inherent in manufacturing that made good jobs. Similarly, in technology, but in some ways, if you look at the status quo, technology is really optimized for efficiency and convenience and not for good, justice, or even for workers. And so what do you think needs to happen in order to make technology actually be a vehicle that creates good jobs? And that means jobs with, that are compensated fairly, with living wages, et cetera. And my other question was around the kind of relationship of the worker shortage to actually to wages, but that's sort of James, because in some ways, like, I read the home care agency newsletters and industry newsletters, and they're all sort of like, oh yeah, there's not enough workers, with this aging population, there's gonna, it's slated to be, it's the fastest growing job sector, there's gonna be a huge need for the workforce, and not a single one looks at the solution as being raising wages. They talk about training or more support for workers, but wages is never on the list as like a solution, and yet I think that's actually like, I agree with the demographic shifts but I think it'd be great to hear sort of like, where does wages fit into that equation?
So let's get back to the panel, and then we'll come back to the next group about odds, John, and Seth.
Okay, let me say a word about wages, because it's exactly the right question, and if you look at my chart, the question is the demand for labor going to shift by more than the supply of labor? Because if it does, then you end up with an increase in wages. That's you end up with wages going down. And when you look at the evidence, unfortunately, this is the slide I didn't get to show, is the demographic effect is much bigger than the technology effect. If you take these forecasts that I was referring to about how the demand for labor will change, compare that to the magnitude of the demographic effect, and you should see, you have to find out, but we should see wages increasing. And if you want to think about a historical precedent, maybe this is not the best one, but think of the Black Death. 30% of the workers in Europe died. It was a great time to be alive if you were alive, because wages went way, way up. And in fact, it stopped surfing for about 100 years, because workers were really in good shape because they were much in demand. So when we talk about good jobs, people compare things like being a gardener to being an assembly line worker. Some people say, well, being an assembly line worker, that's a good job, and being a gardener, that's a bad job. But no, exactly the opposite. Because lots of people do gardening as a hobby. Nobody does the assembly line as a hobby. So what you need for these low jobs is a higher wage. Absolutely. And that's exactly where what's going to happen is in the shrinking labor force.
I would just want to agree with Mariana that it can be a little bit bizarre especially to economists, when you see people whining about how they can't hire people and they don't talk about raising wages. So that is a very natural solution to a labor shortage. And I guess the hope is that, and the belief is that eventually carries through. But I agree that when you don't see it carrying through, that can make you question some of the underlying models. And I guess getting back to this, like, getting rid of low wage jobs, I do think it's important to distinguish between scenarios where there's a very close relationship between what the worker gets paid or the service provider and what the customer pays. Because when those things are very tightly linked, then we can't really tear them apart. So if we said, okay, we want to triple the cost of babysitters, well, that means a lot of people can't go to work. You know, if I want to triple the cost of home health aides, then I can't afford a home health aide. So, you know, these things are, when they're closely linked, they lead to the increase in the wage leads to a reduction in demand. Now, there's gonna be the big scenarios where there's a big wedge between what the customer pays and what the worker makes. And in those cases, of course, that's where collective bargaining and other stuff can come in, because if there's a wedge and the company's taking its profits, then of course you can potentially increase wages without actually reducing the output. But when I think about some of the services, you know, that are consumed by, that are paying for things like babysitting and transportation and so on is a big part of the cost of living, healthcare. So when I think about trying to make those more expensive, that's something we have to watch for very carefully to have unintended consequences. Now, I guess when we look out though, we see we have a lot of unforced errors, right? So unforced errors is, you know, millions of people spending 2 hours in their cars every day. That's actually like a solvable problem. This is human suffering on a daily basis, throwing people's, you know, time with their children and things that actually bring them enjoyment in life out the window on a daily basis, because we can't actually just put in simple, well-understood solutions like congestion pricing and better public transportation. Those are unforced errors. Zoning restrictions and so on. Healthcare, of course, that in the end, if we can't afford a home health aide, then you send your elder person into a nursing home where they cost the government a lot more money. So that's a case where actually if we increase the reimbursement rates, then we could actually, you know, end up paying people more and saving government money at the same time. So of course, there's a lot of unforced errors you can point to that would benefit workers without necessarily hurting consumers. And I think that's one of the low-hanging fruit areas that we should go to. But just in terms of wages, you know, we had an aging relative in my home, and because the agencies would charge $125 an hour for someone who could give medication, which is why my mom and my stepfather had to move in with us, because my mom couldn't leave the house. And so there's a bunch of things broken that lead to that scenario. There's somewhere between $125 and a wage that somebody would be happy with that could allow her to care for her dying husband at home. So I think there's really a lot we can do in these areas to improve efficiency.
I'm going to beg the patience of my co-commissioners. I've got quite a few of you lined up. So go to Art, John, and Sutton. You're going to pass? Oh, okay, so John, Stefan, and Tom. And then we'll come back to Sarah and Betsy.
Great, thank you. Thank you for the panel. Thank you. So this question of augmentation versus automation and control replacement is one that I think we've been grappling with as a union for a number of years. I think as a commission, we've already identified this theme as central to our work here. And I had the opportunity as a member of the AFL-CIO's Commission on Initiative Work to visit another major research institution, not in California, I won't name the institution. And I spoke with the robotics lab head, who was engaged in the process of testing with a major retailer, which I also won't name, a robot that would go up and down the aisles of this store and identify out of stocks and engage in inventory management, and then alert associates when they needed to come and restock the shelves. And it was amazing technology that's developed by the Defense Department in Iraq, and highly detailed optical technology, which is quite unnecessary for this very simple application. But I asked the head of the department, first of all, did you ever talk to any workers about this? The problem with overstocks, and anybody mentioned it, usually not, we don't know there's gaps in the shelves. There's not enough staff to restock the shelves, right? They said, oh yeah, we actually talked to some workers. We went out to the headquarters and the managers brought the workers there and they told us what they thought about these robots and how they were working. And I believe that he honestly thought that he was getting candid feedback about the way that technology was working in the stores. And I guarantee you, he was not. So the question I have is, how have you, it comes down to the question of power. How have you
consider this power, in the supply and demand lines, I think there needs to be a third line for power. Because the supply of labor, it as they go to itself one way under certain conditions and differently under other conditions. And so how can we, if we really do, agreeing with everything that's been said in terms of demographic changes, the shortage of labor, the need for all sorts of other reasons like climate change, to enhance our productive powers, how can we change the mindset of our corporate leaders on the one hand, and also create institutions that will allow workers to participate as equal parties in that design process?
And before you answer that, Ken, let's go one more. Tom, and then we'll go to after that. You can answer them, we'll come back to the next one. So we can go to
So how, as you know, the conventional wisdom prior to the Great Recession was that we had entered the era of great moderation and macroeconomic policy was working and that we were really reducing the risk of unemployment and inflation. So do you think that there is any value in doing scenario planning for a future in which it doesn't look like your current sort of consensus? And what would have to be different for there to be a future that is significantly different in terms of a like large mismatch between the jobs that are being displaced and the jobs that are being created? So that was one question. And the question for Ken, but I think they might have something to say about this as well, which is what role can both the research community and the funders of research, agencies like NSF, for example, what role can they play in sort of putting their thumb a little bit on the scale of intelligence augmentation as opposed to AI?
Okay, let me respond to the first question. Absolutely, scenario planning is critical. I looked at what I think the default or starting situation is, where we looked at what the likely increment on automation will look like in the next decade and what the likely change in demographics will be in the next decade. But that's only one scenario. I emphasize that because not as many people have addressed the demographic challenge as the automation challenge. So I think it's one that really gives you a change in mindset. You recognize you have to look at both forces. If we had tremendously rapid development on the automation side, that would completely change the analysis because that would probably show up as a decreasing rate rather than a story that I think is most likely, which is an increase in overall reaction. Let me just, as Peter's backed out, let me mention one creative way to deal with this employment issue for older people. And again, I'm going to use the Netherlands as an example. What the Netherlands does is if you are working after the retirement age, let's call it 65, then you don't have to pay Social Security taxes, nor does the employer have to pay the Social Security taxes. After all, you're already retired. Okay, so if you don't work at all, there would be no change in the system. If both sides can deduct the taxes, then it gives a strong incentive for people to work. Right now, we're punishing people to work. They contribute twice to Social Security, once before they're retired and then again afterwards. So thinking of policies of that sort can help deal with this issue of the demand for part-time labor, which is very, very real, especially for elderly and also for women to a large degree. A better deal for part-time workers would be a big plus, I think, in terms of moving forward in this environment.
Thanks, Al. So I also want to respond to John's question because I think it's exactly extremely important for you to mention power inequality. And I think the example you gave, well, you didn't name the institution, but I know we see this all the time. There's a huge amount of tone deaf perspective from the researchers who are building a robot. They say we're going to bring this in, the worker will teach the robot how to do the job without any awareness that what that means. And it's actually going to result in a kind of sabotage that we've seen in the past. So, but I think one of the things, this comes back to this people skills, because this is what's lacking often among the researchers and the technologists. They don't understand the empathy of what is it like to be on the receiving end of it. But I do think that there is a real opportunity to engaged, comes back to Mary Kay's point, include workers in thinking about this future in all levels. So there's aspects of any person's job, and I think anyone in this room, if you say, what's some part of your job that you don't like doing? We all have. We can all come up with examples. And those, I think, are the things that are actually most amenable to automation. There are things like transcribing some textual, some conversation, recording. Journalists, they hate doing that. That's not interesting. But that could be automated. But
Or faculty and faculty.
Oh, faculty meetings, we would love to automate that. All right, and then Tom, to your point, and I think you know the answer because you were involved in it, and is that the national agencies, federal agencies like NSF can actually play a very important role in this, and they have, because the National Robotics Initiative, which was formed 5 years ago, actually was, the agenda there was about not replacing workers, but to develop robotics that would augment workers. They call it co-robotics, and that's still the theme for the National Science Foundation. And I can tell you that, and with that subject, all researchers then started thinking and proposing projects in exactly that. How do we build robots that are going to enhance workers? So I think that the federal agencies and the state of California can actually do quite a bit in that regard.
Can I add into, I also want to address John's point. I think this is actually really a crucial point. Part of it is about power, which I completely see, but even if you take the power dynamics away, you see the same mistakes, which I think says that we can make progress with education as well. Within tech companies or say banks, financial institutions trying to adopt AI in a context where their workers do have more power and prestige, we still see the same problem, that technologists develop AI and machine learning solutions, and then the people, their customers inside a firm reject them because the technologists didn't really understand the context in which they were producing the solution. They also unrealistically imagined that their technology could solve every problem and imagined that predictive models were really what-if models and so on. So there's a lot of actually mistakes just by profit maximizing firms with empowered workers in building technology, that if you really understood the limits of the technology and the customers for whom you were building, you would build an augmenting technology because it's not realistic. The technology isn't good enough to replace the worker. So I think that actually that's one of my passions for education here at Stanford, and I go out and give talks about this all the time to businesses and other universities to say, we need to change how we're educating people. We're putting out 1,000 people a year through a machine learning course, telling them how to kind of hammer the nails, but we're not actually giving them enough education about where is this tool applicable and actually understanding that your tool only is part of the problem. So that's something we're trying to work on at Stanford, and I think that the appreciation will grow as the first wave of kind of technology people we send out there realize that they weren't fully educated, and also people who are hiring them come back to us as universities and say, you need a much better rounded education of the people building the technology to appreciate it. We're here in the design school today at Stanford. You're designing a product for users, that those users are humans. The humans will not leave the loop. So how do we actually build products that are more useful?
Yeah, I think at this stage we're going to start to run out of time, but I want to make sure I get to 6 commissioners who've been waiting very, very patiently. That's what the order of them. So I'm going to list the order. We're going to go to Stefan first, and then we're going to go to Saru, Betty, Doug, Fei, and then of course Soraya. And those are 6 commissioners. And at that point, I'm going to ask you to observe your comments until you've heard the observations, and use that as a way to wrap it as well.
So I have 2 things. One is in support of what Mariana said, and then a question for the panel. So the population that we serve, freelancers in the US, there's more freelancers and construction workers in the US. One of the top 3 reasons why people freelance is because of care duties. And for some people, they really want to have the care duties themselves, and they need flexibility in their life to have a career and take care of a sick spouse, elderly parents, and their children. For a lot of them, it's a lack of affordability. And so, yes, we need more care workers, and in order to attract more people, we need to get paid better. But the people that pay them right now don't have the means to pay them more. And I think that's where, coming from a European background, the role of government, and even in this is a policy related commission, I think there's definitely a role for the state to take some of the taxpayers' money to fund and subsidize professional care in a way that gets the best of both worlds. The parents or the care takers have the means to pay for the care workers, and the care workers have dignified and well-paid jobs. I think the question for you, which shocked me the first session we had, was relatively dismissing of the role of education in the future of work. I think we've seen a lot of people saying it's overdone, we talk about education too much, education is not the source of the problem. Obviously, all of you are either in the education field or have been. And I guess my question is, what can be the role of technology and AI in making education more successful and more affordable for all? I was here in grad school in the computer science department when Daphne and Andrew started Coursera. At the time, we all thought that was, essentially Stanford was dead and Coursera was going to be the future. And unfortunately, frankly, sadly, that has not been the case. I mean, Coursera is, a very successful business, and edX and Udacity and others have been very successful too, but they haven't gotten to the point where 95% of the next generation would have graduated from college, or where the cost of education would have gone down tremendously, or where early childhood education was evening out the playing field for kids under the age of 5. So clearly that hasn't worked to the level of scale that I think we were all hoping. So what's your point of view on A, how important is education in the future of work or not? And B, is there a more positive future where we can truly have low cost, widely spread, personalized education from early childhood all the way to lifelong learning that gets us in the better state than we have today? Thank you.
Sorry, I'm going
Hello? 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 Well, I was going to say something else which I will, but just in response to what you first said, another solution to parents and caretakers not having enough money to pay caregivers besides the government subsidizing it is also ensuring that those parents and caretakers are paid enough by the corporations that employ them that they can actually cover the costs of their lives, from childcare to old elderly care to housing to transportation, everything in their life. Like, we should not take the onus off the corporations that employ most workers in this country to pay them enough to actually afford childcare. So I just want to say that. But the main point I wanted to make is that I stepped out for a while, so I'm sorry if this was brought up, but I didn't hear much. I do appreciate everything. I didn't hear much in terms of the racial implications of all of this, and there are severe racial implications. Maybe I missed it, so I apologize. But what I do want to bring it up in terms of how we're seeing it. I so appreciate Mariana bringing up the labor shortage question, because we're seeing it play out as to why the labor shortage is not leading to higher wages, and we're also seeing it with regard to how automation affects jobs. I'm talking specifically about the restaurant industry, because that's what I've spent most of my life working on. With regard to the labor shortage, we are experiencing in the restaurant industry the most severe acute labor shortage in the history of our industry, hands down. And, that has resulted in definitely for what we call back of house workers, the kitchen workers, our industry is severely racially segregated, with people of color in what we call the back of the house and white people in the front of the house in full service restaurants. Back of house workers, we have seen a slight increase where restaurants are having to pay more than the minimum wage. In the front of the house, tipping has allowed the employers to just not increase wages at all. And for white workers, that works. For people of color in the Denny's and the IHOPs, where tips aren't very plentiful, it doesn't work. But still, across the board, wages have not gone up for front of house workers in California or elsewhere, partly because the white workers who get the tips are fine. And so because they're fine, nobody goes up, and the workers of color in the Denny's and IHOPs are struggling. And so we are not, to the point of the models don't exactly work. You expect, a small population, tight labor market, wages to go up. It isn't working. And part of that has to do with race and the fact that white people are doing okay, even in a tight labor market, but people of color in the restaurant industry are really struggling, but wages are not going up, even though employers are desperate for those workers. And the other thing that's happening is the insanity to me is that they've got these people of color in the back who they could employ in the front and could solve some of their labor shortage issues, but they could never in a million years see people of color in the front. It's just out of the question in terms of how people are placed. And so I think we need to push employers, beyond, when we're thinking of labor shortage, we have to think about how does a tight labor market push employers to pay differently, but also how to hire differently and how to deal with mobility differently. And mobility also relates to automation and artificial intelligence and race, because we see in our industry severe racial segregation that artificial intelligence is exacerbating, because there are all kinds of job matching sites that allow restaurant workers to find employment, that have certain algorithms that steer workers of color based on their names into certain positions and white workers into other positions. And so we are seeing negative implications based on race of AI. We are also seeing the potential through a few high road companies that we work with, the potential to do what Mary Kay was talking about, which is actually involve workers in figuring out how technology could make their jobs easier, could make them more efficient and more productive. And I'd be happy to share with people how we've seen a couple of high road companies actually do this, involve restaurant workers in figuring out technology that could work to change both the job, how it functions, the wage and tip structure, and even how we've used some amount of technology to train employers, to think differently about how they're doing all of these things, payment, mobility, and thinking about racial segregation.
Can we go to Betsy and then Doug and Faith and Soraya?
Thank you, and I want to thank the panelists. And, while I subscribe to this notion that there can be effective collaboration between humans and AI, kind of variation of the, equity issue that's come up in terms of worker-informed development and deployment of AI. So my question has to do with how do small companies compete with larger, well-established companies that invest heavily in sophisticated AI, has the ability to refine that AI over time with real-time data, and then also at back end, we have the hiring of most talented human capital. So I kind of see this cycle, and maybe that's an unfair depiction, but I'm just worried about kind of that slice of equity as well in terms of this AI space and all that.
So we've got Doug and then Faith and Soraya.
Thank you, panelists, and at the risk of being potentially provocative, I want to challenge what I think is an underlying assumption here about the correlation between wages and supply and demand in the labor market, because I'm afraid part of it rests on an assumption that employers make rational economic decisions. And I and some of my labor colleagues could spend the rest of the entire day talking about employers making very irrational economic decisions when faced with workers choosing to join together in the unions or exercise their power through bargaining together. You mentioned that in the example. And we're going to hear this afternoon from Steve Pacelli, who's going to tell, I hope, a very powerful story into the decline of what was once one of the highest paying blue-collar jobs in the United States, driving a truck, which was entirely unionized in the Teamsters, and how declining job quality and declining worker power has led to a worker shortage with 100% turnover. So now the industry is looking towards automation to solve the problem that I suggested create. So let me give a more positive example that's come out of our work, where workers have power to be able to create, be able to exist side by side with technology. And I'll point to tens of thousands of Teamsters that drive buses, either paratransit or school buses for children with special needs. So these are seniors, sick people, our most vulnerable population. So I spent a day about a year ago with our largest employer who was testing driverless shuttles. And the first thing is that the employer encouraged me to stand in front of the bus to see if it would stop. And I think they were actually hoping that the bus wouldn't work and I wouldn't be here today, but nevertheless, the technology worked. The point is, our members that do this, yes, they drive a bus, but they're also a social service worker, a healthcare worker, an ambassador, a friend, a caregiver. The people that lead that. The vision that we discussed with the employer, which could happen because workers in this industry have bargaining agreements, which means they are at the table and have a voice in how technology is implemented in their jobs, is that in the future, 75% driver and 25% caregiver, when they no longer have to be behind the wheel, but they can be there to operate buttons on an as-needed basis, they could be 75% caregiver and vehicle operator. But that is going to take workers being organized and having power, and it's going to need government regulation to make sure that we can have that sort of future where technology can actually augment
Then we've got Fei and then sort of, then we'll try to do this with others.
Okay, I want to just close the loop and follow up on the conversation that Tom, Ken, and Susan are talking about what can we do to really nudge the future of this technology to truly be augmentative to humans, especially on the role of what Susan calls, and I agree with her, the potential outsized influence by government and foundations and funding agencies. So I think I want to use Stanford's human-centered AI effort as an example, but this really is more broader than that. I'm quoting one of our associate directors, Rob Leach, a professor in ethics and political science, is that the human dimensions in the development of AI and technology should not be an afterthought anymore. It should be right there since the beginning. And I think this is where I'm calling for a much bigger, whether you call it requirement or encouragement or whatever effort by the funding agencies and foundations to require that in the future of this kind of research. So just a few examples of what these human dimensions are that we want to embed in the research of this technology. From the get-go, do we have ethical guidelines of this research? What are the human factors that are considered in the design of these research projects? Do we have an equivalent of IRB from the medical, especially the human subject community, and we can borrow quite a bit from the medical research community. How is human impact and societal impact measured? Do we have the right metrics and studies? And what about measures of privacy, data fairness, and also the encouragement of the diversity and inclusion of different personnels in this? So I think today there is, as Ken said, there is that attempt, whether it's from NSF or other foundations, but it's not enough, and we're seeing this tremendous, impact that's coming up in the future, and there is some concrete measures we can do in this particular area.
Thank you. And Robin, right.
This is more of reflection, but also a desire. As you are engaged in this important work, I think it's just extremely beneficial. I think it's going to be an underlying issue for us as a commission, and that is to what extent does race, ethnicity, and gender have an impact on when we talk about there are not enough workers, so there's a shortage of, or we don't have sufficient folks with the skills. I think that oftentimes we, don't, there may be a correlational versus a causal, effect. I don't think that we, look at or control for race, ethnicity, and gender as we make those kinds of projections for the future. And so and in some works, I'm sure that has taken place, but I think that's another important dimension of all of this.
So I think at this stage, I'd like to invite our panelists for kind of literally final thoughts, but if you could be very succinct and brief, and then we'll try to wrap up in a very good discussion.
So I mean, I just want to start out by really trying to validate a bunch of justice points that were raised, and I think just to, slightly in our defense, especially among academics, that we try to stay in our lanes and sort of speak to what we know about, and in some sense, like if I had a way to solve racial justice in America, I would quit my job and go do it. But I don't see the path. I don't know exactly what we can do to solve the overall problem. But there are, I think, some small things. So with the caveat that I'm offering very small and insignificant solutions to a much larger problem. I think that just as a woman in a technical field, despite all of my privilege, I still get underestimated, every single day because the human beings basically, look at one aspect. So a 48-year-old woman with 3 children, and what could I possibly know about AI? So at some level, I thought a lot about what these new technologies could do to solve problems. One thing that machine learning and automation can do is look at a broader set of characteristics. So going back to the worker-employer matching, we see this crazy thing where there's lots of qualified people out there, but yet the employers feel that they can't find anybody. And one small part of that is that everybody is looking at the same 3 criteria, and they're not actually finding an efficient way to evaluate people's skills more broadly. So we had an MBA student who went out and did a lot of ground research on this, and basically found that workers from less advantaged backgrounds had a hard time explaining how their prior experience, say, as a manager in a fast food restaurant, would translate into being a manager in a different job. They weren't able to articulate it, and then on the employer side, they weren't able to appreciate the skills that people had. So if we could do something to help people better document their breadth of skills, teach them how to express them, and also on the other side, teach the employers how to evaluate them, that would be very helpful. And even like somebody looking at a resume, they might not realize that this state school has a great engineering program, that this community college actually is incredibly successful in a sub-skill. The human brain is bad at that. So I think that while you may be right that right now the algorithms might be giving people what they want, and if they want white names, the algorithms give white names. It's not because the people designing the algorithms want to do that. It's just that they're sort of responding to some of the biases on the employer side. So it's a 2-sided problem. If we can give tools to the employers to evaluate people better and let the algorithms better reflect and surface these skills where there's workers that aren't finding a match, in principle, we could make it a tiny, tiny bit better. So even though it won't solve the bigger problems, I still want to work in that direction.
Okay, so I think this one also, Stefan's one about the optimism around MOOCs from a couple of years ago, and I have to be one, for one, a little bit relieved that it didn't become as successful as it did. Not only because I'm a professor, but also because I was concerned about the level of uniformity that would cause on education. If everyone took the same course by the same instructor, that would end up with a very uniform output in terms of thinking. And I really do, well, we can talk about that later, but I think that is an issue. I think what happens though is that what was shown over time is that what was important in teaching, as well as healthcare, as well as many of the jobs we're talking about, is the personal interaction. So as you said, the bus drivers are actually also friends and ambassadors. And this aspect again goes back to this idea of we need the people skills, and it has to be built in an inclusive way as we develop the technology. I think that we need to be sensitive to the racial, the ethnic justice aspect, and I appreciate that this commission is doing exactly that by continuing to remind us of this, which is very important. And I want you to just to lead to, I think there's an opportunity for this commission and the state of California to consider this championing an alternative to this excitement around deep learning that's so widespread. And that wide learning, that really thinking about how we can be at the forefront as we were in the 50s in the compact for the future of California education. We could do this again today, where we say there's a new approach to education. So, Stefan, to your point, that we can think about education as something that's inclusive of very broad populations, of technology as well as and people skills, and also continuing education lifelong. So throughout the lifetime of all of our workers. And that idea of wide learning is something I think we could is much needed today.
So I agree with you that the issue of fast food and food in general is a very, very interesting one, an important one. I think it's not fully understood by economists who study these labor markets, and that would be something I think you could call out in your report. But the best explanation I've heard so far is there are lots of people who were non-employed. There is a distinction in the statistics between unemployed, you're looking for work but can't find it, and non-employed, you're not looking for work. They've given up. They give it up because the job market was so bad. And then as the job market improved, and you got some increase in wages, which is definitely the case, particularly in the back office, then people were pulled in to the market. So the wage increase hasn't been as strong as one might have guessed ex ante because people were not sufficiently aware of the non-employed people given up because the market was so bad. As the market gets better, you're seeing employment go up and some increase in wages, but just not perhaps commensurate with what you might have hoped for. So as long as we continue to be prosperous, as long as the economy is running hot as it is now, we would expect to see some continual wage improvements at the end. We'll see.
I just have to say, some of those non-employed you're talking about are formerly incarcerated individuals
Yes.
to the labor market, and California has the largest population.
Absolutely right, yeah, absolutely, because, and of course, this is disproportionately African American and Latino and so on. So you've got a situation where the non-employed become employed, that's really a good thing, they're getting some increase in wages, but of course we could do a lot better.
Well, at this point, I'd love to thank our panelists and also thank the patience of my fellow commissioners. This has been a very rich discussion. I think I'm not going to attempt to summarize it because we're also out of time in any case, and we need to move on to this part of the discussion. But thank you very much.
Thank you. So as you can see, Anmol is gracefully making his way over to the table. And as a woman who spent her entire adult life fighting for workers to be able to take breaks and rest, I am not allowing the Commission on the Future of Work to do that. So I checked with our Secretary of Labor and my co-chair. As you could see, the next subject we were going to try and tackle before lunch was the uneven social impacts of technological change. And I don't know if Anmol's had a chance to check with Jed about how you're going to adjust in real time here. But Jed Kolko, I want to welcome as a chief economist from Indeed.com. And Anmol was going to attempt to moderate. So should I turn to you, Anmol, to introduce, and then it would be great to give people a sense of how long we think this session is, just for people's bio clocks, to understand when we will take a lunch break. But Anmol's got to get his mic. We can't hear you over here.
Yeah, well, we're gonna do our best.
Great,
So we're gonna
fabulous.
power through this as quickly as possible. I think it's a very important topic that came
It's
up.
so amazing, actually, that this follows, because it's, the planners obviously anticipated that the biggest things that would be raised is the social impact
Yeah.
in this previous discussion.
That's exactly right. I think the comments, especially from
Dr. Kobe and Sorry teach this conversation up very well. So we're going to move into a conversation about those uneven social impacts of technological change. I'm going to hand it over to Jed, but it's a pretty brief presentation, and then we'll move into discussion. I was going to say I think there's a sense that this new format of the roundtable has generally worked quite well with promoting conversation and more dialogue between the commissioners. So to extend that after the presentation of that way, almost maybe too well for half an hour time now. But we'll do this as quickly as we can. And then I should note there's a working lunch that happens right after this. We have to talk about Anne Marie Slaughter from New America, head of New America. So after this, the commissioners are going to have to go downstairs, quickly grab food, come back, and be ready for that conversation as well. So with that, let me choose Jed Kogo. Jed who is the chief economy. He's the chief economist at Indeed, at the Indeed Hiring Lab. Previously, he was the chief economist in VP Analytics at Trulia, an online real estate marketplace. He's led research teams at Public Policy Institute of California, and he specializes in using large-scale, proprietary and publicly available data sets to cover insights about labor markets and user work and to tell the uneven social impacts of technology.
Great, thank you very much, and I'd like to thank the Commission for inviting me to speak on this question. What I'm going to do in the interest of time is I'm actually not going to talk through every slide. You have them, you can refer to them later. I will jump to a handful of them to show a certain set of points. But I would like to do a very, very fast version of where I think some of the uneven social impact of technological change might be. The punchline is this. My view is that there are lots of uncertainties about overall how technology and automation might affect work. I largely agree with what we heard in the previous panel, that some of these fears about automation taking all the jobs, about mass unemployment, are almost certainly overblown. But I think there's still a lot of uncertainty around what the effect of technology is going to be on the number of jobs or amount of work overall. I think there's actually much less uncertainty about where the pain is likely to fall. So whether you think there's going to be only a little bit of pain and a lot of prosperity, or lots and lots of pain, there's not that much disagreement about who is likely to bear whatever pain or burden there is, large or small. The very fast punchline of where I think that impact is going to lie, I want to touch on both geography and demographics. On geography, first of all, California is probably in better shape than most states when it comes to the effect of technology on the future of work. But the differences within California are enormous. In fact, the differences within parts of the state are bigger than most differences between states in the US. And in a minute, one of the things that I will still show you is a map, keeping this in mind. On demographics, very, very strong tie between where the pain is likely to fall in education. Education is the strongest predictor of whether someone today works in a job that is at greater risk from being automated or changed by technology. The racial and ethnic differences in California are likely to be a bit wider than in the US overall. When it comes to age, in California, not as much of a difference by age. In fact, younger workers are more likely in California to be doing jobs at greater risk from automation than older workers. But when we think just about automation and work, we need to go beyond this question of, is someone today in a job that is likely to be threatened by automation? It's not only whether someone's job is going to disappear or not, and who or what places are likely to be in jobs that are at risk. There's also, what does the transition look like? So you get two people, both in the same occupation, at similar risk of being automated, but one might be in a position, possibly because of having more wealth or more family support, to be able to weather that transition more easily than the other. So it's not just about what is likely to happen to the demand for labor in different occupations and losing their jobs. It is also who is going to be more able to weather and take advantage of transitions. So with that overview, I've said most of what I hope to say at a high level. I'd like to just give a little bit more color, a few more specifics, and a couple pretty pictures. So skipping ahead. The pretty picture, by the way, was not the picture. That's not the pretty picture. The first point, of course, is distribution matters because even though we're uncertain about the aggregate effect, it is pretty clear that evenness is likely to apply. The way I look at this is the way that most folks are trying to look at the effect of automation on work, but again, evenness too. It is simply to think about the types of occupations that are at greater risk from automation or might not see as fast growth from automation. Classify those occupations and then take a look at who is in those occupations and where those occupations are today. So the studies that have claimed that half the jobs will be eliminated due to automation, and the studies that say no, it's almost all past, there are few jobs, pretty much they all start with the same kind of framework of saying some jobs are at more risk than others, and which jobs tend to fall into two buckets. Those that are considered more routine in the sense that they can be accomplished following explicit rules, or more of the tasks in those jobs can be accomplished following explicit rules, and those that are non-routine. This is a very crude way of dividing the entire complicated world of work into two categories. It is a standard way that economists and others have looked at this question of the future of work. Broadly speaking, the routine job sectors include sales and office jobs, clerical jobs, administration as well, natural resource construction and maintenance, and production, transportation, material movement, and that includes manufacturing. The non-routine job sectors are those that are harder to automate, expected to be harder to automate. Those include both management, business science, and arts jobs, as well as service jobs, broadly defined. Now, there can be lots of arguments about how many of the routine jobs may disappear, maybe none. But we've already seen in recent years that job growth has been much faster among the non-routine jobs than the routine jobs. So whether or not you think jobs are going to disappear or jobs are going to still be here in the future, we're already seeing big differences in the growth of the routine and the non-routine jobs. So very simply, taking this framework and looking at where are a higher share of routine jobs, non-routine jobs, and within them, you see, first of all, that California is at somewhat lower risk. I'm showing you state by state the share of jobs in each state that are considered those routine jobs, jobs that are at greater risk of automation, even if that only means that they won't grow as fast rather than being eliminated by automation. California is lighter colored. It has a lower share of jobs that are routine, in part because California has a lower share of manufacturing in our economy than most other states, doing a higher share of both professional arts, technical jobs, as well as service jobs. The states at greatest risk tend to be those in both the older and newer manufacturing belt, Indiana, Kentucky, and parts of the South. But within California, the differences are even bigger than the differences between California and the rest of the U.S., with the Bay Area having by far the lowest share of routine jobs in the workforce, the central parts of the Central Valley having the highest share, with Southern California, LA, Orange County being somewhat in between. Again, the important point here is these differences between California are bigger than the differences between California and the rest of the U.S. So thinking at a state level, some of the strategies and concerns about the future of work may not be so different from what we think about the national level. But within the state, when we think about regions, and after all, the state is not a labor market. It is the parts of the state, the regions within the state, that constitute different labor markets. That is the area for which most people look for a job, commute, look for housing. Within the state, huge differences in the share of jobs that are routine and the possibility of the effect that automation might have on work. Turning quickly from geography to demographics, in the same way, we can look at who is more likely to be in routine jobs, and therefore those where there might be a higher risk of automation. As I mentioned, whether looking at the US, the blue bars, or California, the orange bars, education is a huge factor. The more education you have, the much less likely you are to be in routine jobs. You'll notice that no high school degree and high school degree are similar. One reason for that, why there's not a bigger difference there, is some of the jobs that are less susceptible to automation are some of the personal service jobs, home health aides, and some other kinds of service jobs that traditionally don't necessarily require any formal education. These jobs are often very low wage jobs. They're insecure jobs, and not necessarily the ones more at risk of automation. So one side point on this is there are lots of reasons to be concerned about work that isn't at risk of automation, because some of the jobs that are at less risk of automation are nonetheless some of the lowest paid and most precarious jobs in the economy in that sense. The differences across education are going to be bigger than the differences that I'm about to show you by race, ethnicity, and by age. By age, the differences are considerably smaller. The youngest workers are the ones most likely to be in jobs at risk of automation, often in clerical, sales jobs. Not much of a difference as you get older. In California, older workers are slightly less likely to be in jobs that are considered routine, but the difference is much, much smaller than those by education. On race and ethnicity, Asian Pacific Islander, least likely to be in routine jobs, Hispanic, Latino, most. And these differences are slightly larger in California across race and ethnicity than they are for the US overall. One reason for this is the very large agricultural sector in California, which is heavily Hispanic Latino. Many of those jobs are at risk of automation. We've already seen decades of mechanization and technological change in agriculture. That's one reason why the gap between Hispanic Latino and other races and ethnicities is larger in California than in the US overall. The last point I'd like to make before turning to discussion is simply this last point that it's not just about whose jobs are most at risk or whose jobs are not likely to go as fast. This question of who can manage transitions is essential. So even if there will be enough jobs to go around in the future, and it's only a question of training people or making it possible to move or getting people from the careers that they're in today that might be at risk to those where there's more growth. Transitions are hard, and they are not equally hard for everyone. They're especially hard for older adults, and I know this could work in a tech firm. When I talk to some of my younger colleagues who say to me, you should really learn this new thing we're all doing. And I'm explaining again and again that the calculation about investing in new skills is somewhat different than it is at 25. Even for those of us who believe we are as capable in every way as we were, it's a different calculation of what makes sense to invest in at different stages of life. More importantly, lower income and less mobile households, of course, are going to have much bigger challenges making transitions from one type of job or one type of company to another. Not having a cushion of wealth that lets you spend some time, spend some psychic energy, learning new skills, getting a new license, moving to a new location. Again, even two people whose jobs are equally likely to be automated, the transition can be very, very different. The last point I'd like to make, though, is we often think about the demand for labor, whether technology is going to change the decision by employers, whether to substitute people or some parts of someone's job with machines. But the supply side also matters in the sense that technology has the potential to change the supply of labor, how much people are willing or able to work. I think the best example of this historically in the US is the advent of the pill, which radically changed the way that women could think about and make decisions to invest in education and career. And research has suggested that was a key driver in the entry of women into the formal paid workforce. We could well see other kinds of technological advances that change the supply of labor, and differently for different groups. The potential is greatest for the groups today whose labor force participation is lower. That could mean women, particularly if there are technological advances that make it more possible to automate or use other tools or technologies to handle some of the caregiving tasks. This burden of today, of course, called largely on women. Imagine autonomous vehicles, if they were able to take over the chauffeuring of the children for part of the day, how much labor supply that might open up for parents and other caregivers who spend some of their time driving their children around. Also for older adults, technological changes that essentially support medical advances that make it easier for older adults to lift things, physical activities, anything that essentially extends the time that we can spend working could be examples of technological changes that boost labor supply. Again, these also have very uneven effects depending on the types of people that we're talking about. Again, to wrap up, we don't know overall what is going to happen with technology in future work. Distribution of social impact, though, is much easier to predict. California in better shape than most of the US, except the second government in the state. The least educated Hispanics are most at risk from automation, should automation eliminate some jobs. But the transition varies in supply and certainly. Thanks so much. I'm going to discuss, take questions, go back to anything that I share.
Great. Thank you. So we'll do a few minutes, I think, of a conversation minute and then get some food. So it sounds like Roy up first. Actually, the three of us in that first, right? So we have Art, Senator Stern, and Roy.
Thanks. It's usually can lead for people to question the veracity of the data that they're looking at. Forgive me, but I'm confused. The earlier panel talked about the risk of automation too. And I thought they said that, for example, construction work, because of this high dexterity, is not at risk of automation. You suggest that it is a risk of automation because of routine. So I'm not confused.
Yeah, let's do a question or let's give you.
Alright. Thank you, and Jed, this is sort of for you, but also potentially for, I don't know if professors are still around somewhere, an economist, but very concretely, what data are we missing to better analyze this problem in California? So we've had a lot of data sets been thrown about, and I've seen light blue and dark blue, or light yellow and orange. I don't know what level of granularity we've got in sort of public or private data sets and what we need to be solving for either as policymakers or as regulators or commissioners, labor statistics that we need. I'd love a little more insight on the data gaps, and then trying to level set this conversation in a policy context would be helpful too. I'm trying to get a sense of the efficacy of past interventions into labor markets. Domestic Workers' Bill of Rights in 2014, minimum wage laws being passed, sort of understanding various
flavors of labor policy interventions and how that concretely has affected the marketplace as maybe a roadmap for going forward in the future. So that might be sort of a question for on a go forward basis too, but the more we can nest these presentations in the context of work we've been doing legally in the state of California, the better in my view.
Thank you. I'm so glad I've never asked me to speak louder before. At the risk of violating our don't jump to solutions too quickly, I want to broaden the question from past success with labor markets to if you were writing the final recommendations for proposals for this commission, what do you think we ought to recommend? I appreciate you being grounded in the present and bringing up race and income disparities and all kinds of other issues. So we'd love to hear what you're there for.
Then Mary Kay, you can jump in.
Yeah, I just want to challenge the notion of less educated and low skill, which I think was raised by commissioners in the last meeting. I was trying to find in the synthesis. And I wanted to consider, which I appreciate and respect the research you're drawing from, but what if we thought of it as structurally blocked from the kind of traditional societal measure on education and recognize the workers who are making ends meet in the most impossible of circumstances in the economy and democracy have had to develop skills that many of us, if we thought of it in a different way, would see as the most untapped potential for shared prosperity. So it just hit me again based on the earlier last month's conversation and this one, that it's a bias that we have in how we analyze. Henry made me think of this, how we analyze the data that I just want to put a point on and challenge us about.
Let's get one last one from Stefan, and then there's just a time allowed Jed a couple minutes to respond.
Yeah, so I think my question, first of all, I would totally agree with Roy. I've heard you talk about pretty clear positions on what policy we should take, and there's great analysis, but I think you've been too shy to tell us what you really so really would like to hear this. But I think in particular, there's a lot of these, correlation versus causation. Like, if you do this, then this thing happens. Like, perfect example would be, okay, well, let's have people who are in places where the jobs are being displaced move to the places where the jobs are plentiful. So is that true or is that not true? Or, to Mary Kay's point, maybe the issue is not an issue of education, it's an issue of employers not realizing that people have skills. Just because they didn't go to Stanford doesn't mean they don't have the skills to do the work. And if that's the case, then the solution is not to go spend billions of dollars educating people to get them to go to Stanford, but potentially fixing a market failure where employers suck at doing understanding skills. And they use college degree as a proxy for something else because they're too lazy to figure out what that something else is. And then maybe the policy change we would make, the state, I believe, and you guys correct me if I'm wrong, I believe we're not allowed to ask as employers, we're not allowed to ask for candidates past salaries. And one reason for doing this is to reduce wage inequality. If women are paid less and minority women are paid even less on the dollar in their previous job, by not asking them how much they make on the previous job, we're less likely to provide different things. The same argument, if the issue is not a lack of education, but a lack of recognition for the skills that people have, we could also say you can no longer ask for college education online. In fact, you cannot disclose whether you went to college or not, because it's completely irrelevant and it's discriminatory. Right? So I guess my question here, in addition to Roger's point, is how much can we isolate in all of these studies that you do? What is just the outcome of past decisions versus what is truly the root cause of the underlying issue, and therefore how does it lead to better policy making in the future?
My question. It sounds like there's definitely a religious commitment to policy prescriptions. Your ideas that you've been holding back from the commission so far. So say whole minutes, and then if you want to start with those, and then just or whatever it is.
Great. So starting with policy and sort of what we do about all this, and my answers are somewhat different for California than they are for the US overall, given the big differences within the state geographically, and also the fact that California starts out at somewhat less risk from some of these issues than the US overall. The biggest issue for the future of work in California, I do think, is housing. The fact that high housing costs end up creating incredibly long commutes, price people out of places where there are jobs, and price lots of jobs out of California that end up going to other states. High housing costs are highly correlated with high commercial rents and therefore high wages. And so high housing costs are an issue, not just one of social justice, but also one of economic competitiveness. And it's the area where California is the most extreme outlier relative to the rest of the country. Lots of these other issues about technology and future of work, one is true for the US, largely true for California, or California might be a few steps ahead. When it comes to housing, and what that means for what it takes to be able to live in California, that's where California is more behind the rest of the US, I think, than any other issue. So the most important future of work policy for California, I think, is around housing costs and affordability. One question was, what have we learned in the recent past in terms of successes around labor? The EITC, the Earned Income Tax Credit, is thought of as one that probably has the most one of the policies with the most widely beneficial effects on workers, with probably fewer possible negative other effects on the labor force or the economy. So as an example of a kind of policy that has, that economies generally point to it, doing significant earned income tax credit, for which there's also a state version as well as the federal version. Policies that encourage, that make transition easier for people who are in the kinds of occupations that, even if they're not eliminated or reduced, are shifting significantly. Support for training, but not just support for training in terms of providing courses or on-the-job training or publicly sponsored training, but providing a kind of safety net that makes it possible to take advantage of that training. If there is no cushion, if there is no child care, no elder care, it is very, very difficult even to think about making a transition to developing new skills, to training. I think far more effort should be going into how to make those transitions manageable and less painful, rather than thinking about how we slow down the rate of automation or pace of technology. So in terms of top policy recommendations or what we do, that's at the list. To answer a couple of other things, first of all, I do my best never to say low skill when I mean less educated. I'm actually saying explicitly less educated as a sort of measure of educational attainment as we observe in data. I think skill and education are related in some ways, but often very, very different. And completely agree that there's a range of skills that, as someone said earlier, are sometimes hard to articulate, that often come out sometimes in adversity. I mentioned, for instance, since tomorrow's National Coming Out Day, that kind of skill that one gets for a closet, the skill of being able to read a room, that's not a skill that shows up anywhere in any sort of skills inventory, but ends up being the kind of skill that can be incredibly valuable in all kinds of workplace settings. The question about construction, And why is that classified under routine, whereas it's something that is harder to replace with robots? So part of my answer is technology and automation is much broader than just robots. And so when you think about the effect of technology, automation, in the future of work, it's not just what can be done with robots, but it's also how does the ability to create, share, maintain databases affect the nature of the job? How does other kinds of mechanization affect the nature of the job? How does the ability to computerized design or outsource specs in technology affect the nature of the job? So I don't think only in terms of robots, which we heard some about in the first panel, but more broadly, a wide range of technological advances. Part of the answer also is some of the data limitations made it necessary to group certain kinds of applications together at a higher level. The specifics of that grouping that I did doesn't actually have much impact on which demographic and geographic groups turn out to be most in practice. Other kinds of data that we would like, as Susan on the previous panel mentioned, the ability to see what has happened to people over time would be hugely advantageous for understanding the effect on all kinds of policies. It is a limitation that we have in understanding the effectiveness of policy. But one warning about thinking about starting today to develop or create or collect data to start to understand the late and future work. There's so much of the value of data that we look at today is the ability to compare it to the past, the ability to compare it across different groups and different settings. That's hard to do with data that we just start collecting today. And especially when we think about the future of work and automation, what has happened in past waves of automation turns out to be incredibly grounding and important context for understanding whether today is different or not. So I would, there's more information that we need that we could start gathering today, but I wouldn't give up the data that we have today, for which there are historical series going back 150 years, in understanding a lot of most important concepts. And things that goes to policy, data points, most of the questions that came up. Just what it is.
No, that's great. Cover lots of them. Well, with that mindset, in terms of time for today, we're going to acknowledge the recognition that this discussion is a bit truncated. We'll continue to look for ways to incorporate some of these substantive topics in the future meetings. I think it is very important. There are a number of important questions and issues that are coming up. For the commissioner specifically, the next steps, just logistically today, I mentioned there's lunch downstairs, and I'm told that there's lunch provided for the commissioners and panelists over the state. We're unable to provide lunch for everyone who's here to attend. But the commissioner should go downstairs, grab your food, come back as quickly as you can, and then we'll be ready for working lunch with Anne-Marie Slaughter in 7 minutes.